Hi everyone, Justin here. We'll be back with another new episode soon. My wife got COVID and needed to stay home isolated, so I've been helping take care of her while also trying to avoid getting sick myself. And so I wasn't really in the best position to edit and record over the weekend, so apologies, but we will have a brand new episode now that the dust has begun to settle around From Here to the Great Unknown and the Oprah Special, giving our final thoughts on those, catching up on listener feedback, and resuming Song of the Week. Today, though, I wanted to put something up on the feed that is an example of the mini-series that we've had going up on our TCBCast Patreon all year, and is finally wrapping up for the year at the end of this month. You may have heard us mention it the last several months. It's an experiment that we've been calling TCBCast After Dark. And this year's arc has been all about the exploration into Elvis conspiracy theories. Back in 2022, Gurdeep and I had attempted to do an episode about conspiracy theories around Elvis's death, and as it went along, I just kept getting more and more frustrated to the point that it felt wrong to give air to so much crass, obvious exploitation, not just of Elvis, but of fans who were clearly deeply traumatized and grieving from his sudden death. In spite of all the work that we've done to try to make our show primarily focused around Elvis's career, his art, his cultural impact, that episode remains the number 10 most downloaded episode of TCBcast because sadly it is true, people still care so much more about the morbid end than the preceding 20 plus years of his career. So I stand by the approach that we took and what we said on that episode, that there are real con artists out there who continue to prey on vulnerable people, and that should not be taken lightly, and should never outshine Elvis's artistic output or learning about those who inspired him and made him as a phenomenon possible. Earlier this year, Rabia of Suddenly a Frank Sinatra Podcast and I started off with what was originally going to be just a usual bonus review of an Elvis-related TV program. It was an episode of the tabloid news program Hard Copy that was effectively a rarely seen Elvis biopic called I, Elvis. Its exploitative depiction of the moment of his death, recreated by an actor and played over and over and over, and the contrast of this script that presented itself as caring and sympathetic while simultaneously returning again and again to a crass depiction frustrated us so much that we decided that to tell the story properly, we had to name names when it came to the creatives involved. It became less of a story about I, Elvis, and more about how tabloid TV programs of the 80s and 90s, like Hard Copy or A Current Affair, came about. How intertwined that entire media ecosystem was with a larger story that, believe it or not, circled all the way back around to Steve Dunleavy's Elvis, What Happened? And after we finished with that, we kind of knew that we had the angle on the topic that I had shied away from over 2 years ago. We wanted to tell the story of how Elvis conspiracy theories happened, who created them, who exploited them, and how. We had to do a lot of actual legwork, maybe the closest thing to journalism we've ever done on TCBcast. Armed with an academic book from 1995 called True Disbelievers, The Elvis Contagion by George Plaskides and R. Sergei Denisov, as our North Star, we delved into numerous books, newspaper archives, tax and property records, and yes, even the FBI's files on Elvis Presley to try to tell the story of how Elvis conspiracy theories came about and understand them as a way of shining light on how other, more insidious conspiracy theories today spread, how they take advantage of vulnerable people, and how the media and social media give them a platform, inadvertently creating more believers. What I was not expecting in all of this was to actually find a story about Elvis Presley, the real Elvis Presley that has almost never been told before. It's barely mentioned in major biographies of him. I found one passing reference in Elena Nash's Revelations from the Memphis Mafia. And I think it's in large part because it was tainted by what at the time seemed like the ravings of wild-eyed conspiracy theorists. No one took the information that they brought up seriously because they seemed like fundamentally unserious people, which to be fair, it was mostly true. But as you'll hear in this episode, one of the conspiracy theories about Elvis that was introduced in the 1991 TV broadcast, The Elvis Files, hosted by the man who had co-starred in 2 movies alongside Elvis, Bill Bixby, has its basis in some real truth that has been misrepresented. Back in 2022, I felt it was irresponsible for us to share and discuss Elvis conspiracy theories on our show out of the fear of someone finding our show brand new, getting curious about something that we said offhand in that episode, and accidentally stumbling into that world today, because I had seen what had become of it. You see, the Elvis conspiracy world of the 80s and 90s was sort of darkly humorous, with absurd people who make great characters to laugh at, and even more absurd circumstances. Shelby Singleton, Jimmy Ellis, Major Bill Smith, Bill Beanie, Gail Brewer-Giorgio. It's easy to laugh about a lot of that. What's not easy to laugh about is how the platforms for Elvis conspiracies today have become a funnel to lead people to more misinformation, more dangerous modern conspiracy theories. I had not planned on releasing much of TCBcast After Dark to the main feed because I still worry about that. But in the wake of reading Lisa Marie Presley's From Here to the Great Unknown, hearing her talk about how from literally the day she was born, her life was dominated by attention and scrutiny from the media, hearing her talk about her father's vulnerabilities, hearing her talk a little about how she wished she had had a different relationship with her grandfather in the brief time they had together, I feel it's important to share this story too, because almost no one else has bothered telling it truthfully. No one except author David Howard, whose book Chasing Phil, The Adventures of 2 Undercover Agents with the World's Most Charming Con Man, was instrumental in providing the central basis for the facts that were supported by contemporaneous newspaper articles in the mainstream media that we were able to dig up. I cite this book in the show itself later, but I wanted to do that here at the top as well, so that you can go read for yourself the truth about Elvis Presley and Operation Fountain Pen.
Our story begins in May of 1976, when Elvis wanted to sell one of his airplanes. Besides the famous Lisa Marie, Elvis owned 3 smaller jets: a Lockheed Jetstar, a Jet Commander, and a Dassault Falcon. In early 1976, Elvis told his father, who handled all of his personal finances, that he wanted to sell the Jetstar. Vernon was loyal to his son, but was apparently not a very good businessman. Vernon was introduced to a man named Frederick Peter Pro in May of 1976. Pro talked Vernon into getting involved with a very complicated leasing arrangement with his company. The Jetstar wasn't airworthy, and Pro also said he would facilitate repairs. But Frederick Peter Pro was, in reality, a con man, a member of a criminal group called the Fraternity, a group with direct ties to organized crime. It has been estimated that the Fraternity managed to con at least $2 billion from people all over the world. And by the spring of 1977, according to an attorney familiar with the case, the Presley estate had lost more than $1 million.
Operation Fountain Pen is real, Felix.
Wait, what?
He may have been the greatest American entertainer ever, but he was also a complex, intelligent, humorous, and tortured individual.
We're gonna have a TV party tonight. All right! We're gonna have a TV party, all right! Tonight! We got nothing better to do.
Sounds like sweeps month to me.
Welcome to TCBcast After Dark, where we explore the dark, seedy underbelly of the Elvis conspiracy world, or just the Elvis underworld generally. I'm Justin Gosman.
I'm Rabia Azad.
I'm Felix McFarlane.
Hello, Felix.
Yay!
Hey, it's me.
Felix is my regular co-host on my main show, Suddenly, a Frank Sinatra podcast, which I really should plug more often on TCBcast After Dark. He's come in as some fresh eyes, as some much-needed a fresh perspective on the Elvis is Alive saga as we're going through it. Because we're up to the Elvis Files TV special. And as often when Felix comes on TCBcast, it's just very funny to think of dropping him in here.
Yeah, because Felix, you're coming in. Obviously, our patrons will have heard you on the 2 years of Clambake so far, the Christmas specials. But that's basically all of your Elvis experience is Clambake, the little extraneous side things that we've done in relation to Clambake, and then like a few sequences when we did that episode of Suddenly on Three Coins in the Fountain, where I showed you some scenes where the actresses who were in Three Coins in the Fountain, the TV show, had been in movies with Elvis. So I showed you some of the scenes from that. That's your Elvis knowledge experience.
All of it.
That's it.
Yeah.
So now we're dropping you right into 6 episodes, 7 episodes, and however far in we are on this, into the Elvis conspiracy world.
And on top of that, this is our second attempt at recording this episode as well. So So Felix has been caught up about everything we've talked about, but that audio will go out separately to what you're hearing now.
Yes, so if you want to hear that, check that out on the Suddenly feed, and I will share a link when that goes live, when all that's done and ready to go. But yeah, you'll get to hear Felix get basically a condensed version, a very condensed version of what we've been covering the last few episodes of After Dark.
This is episode 6 of
We're on episode 6. Oh my gosh.
Is Elvis Alive saga. Yeah. Which, as I was saying, one of the things that's most frustrating about it is that it is so complicated and difficult to follow. Then when you finally understand it, you understand something stupid.
Yeah.
There's just nothing. It's so
silly,
pointless to know about, and yet also so meaningful as well, because not only is it ridiculous and makes no sense, but also it explains a lot of the things that have happened in the world since, which have made even less sense. So it's both essential knowledge and absolutely useless knowledge, and complicated and simple as well.
What makes sense for bringing you in, Felix, is this is the first episode where the Clambake connection is actually tangible now. We've entered the Clambake extended universe because the Elvis Files that we're talking about today, the television special from 1991, is hosted by one of the stars of Clambake, Bill Bixby.
And now, our host on the Elvis Files, Bill Bixby.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Hello and welcome to the Elvis Files.
That's right. J.J. Jameson.
This is all just long game for you to have a slightly richer Clambake viewing experience. that is like, if people vote for it, mind you. If people, they might not.
That's true.
I don't know why they wouldn't. It's been gold every time.
We'll see.
Quickly want to give a little kind of in-betweener of what's gone on in between the last episode of Elvis Wanted Dead or Alive, and obviously Forever Elvis and everything else we covered in that last episode. But the most recent thing that we had talked about was the Geraldo Rivera episode, Elvis Wanted Dead or Alive, in early 1989. What's gone on since then? Well, at the end of 1990, there was a book that came out called The Death of Elvis, What Really Happened, by Charles C. Thompson and James P. Cole. Now, Charles C. Thompson, he was the producer, if you remember, on the 2020 special that Geraldo Rivera did in that very first episode of ours of the conspiracy stuff, not hard copy, but the 2020 special, the Elvis cover-up. And his collaborator on this, James Cole, was a journalist at the Memphis Press-Scimitar. So he had done stories on Elvis and Graceland and that whole world for a number of years, and was the local connection to Memphis for this book. And basically what they did was that they had seen all of the Elvis Alive conspiracy theory stuff blow up in 1988. They spent 1989 writing the book, published it in 1990, basically giving an in-depth explanation of how and why Elvis died in a very kind of gruesome clinical read. I did actually read through this. Rabia, you haven't read this book, right?
No, I haven't. No, so I just thought, oh God, is this just a recap of the TV special / other VHS
honestly,
tape? Or...
It is mostly a recap of the 2020 special, but the way that they structure that section of it is it's almost like the director's commentary, the producer's commentary on the 2020 special, because they break down and then Charles C. Thompson is talking about, and then I went and looked for this information, such and such thing, talked to this person, and here's where I brought in Geraldo, and Geraldo did this and talked to this person and that person.
Where did you find this book? How did you get your hands on it?
It's on Archive, yeah. Yeah, so
it is. Okay.
I checked it out, but it is a worthwhile read if you are interested in this kind of thing. Like I said, it is a little bit of a gruesome read because it does go into... it has interviews with people who were there when the autopsy was going on, and kind of a blow-by-blow of that. It's very humanizing for Elvis in that respect. But this comes out, and Gail begins prepping her follow-up book called The Elvis Files, Was His Death Faked?, which ends up being released roughly around the same time, October 22nd, 1990. It completely blows past not only the fact that Charles Thompson and James Cole's book is coming out and everything that's in there, but also blows over everything that we saw happen in the last half of 1988 and the early 1989. She doesn't mention David Darlock. She doesn't really... she basically ignores the Mike Joseph admission on Larry King that we discussed, where he admits that the pool house photo wasn't Elvis, and she just introduces a whole bunch of other conspiracy theories that she's been gathering over all this time from the fanzines and various fans that have come up with new theories.
Incredible sources.
Very credible sources.
Almost sad that you have to come out with a book with the correct information because someone came out with a book that's so... It's so stupid and it's so obvious. It's so full of very. I think. I guess we didn't have the internet as readily available at the time, but I don't know. It's just even watching the special. There's nothing that's proven. And it's so embarrassing. And then it's so someone has to write an actual credible book to be and then this is definitely what happened. And we do have evidence because some people people were believing this. Trash pile.
And what really happened is so nothing as well. It's just really not that big of a story. And again,
people hate that. People hate when deaths are nothing.
When it's simple, yeah. I think Rivera says that at one point. He's maybe people felt that he just didn't have the finale that he deserved or something, and they just couldn't live with that.
A weird thing I have to keep reminding myself too is because a lot of people have stories about Elvis's ghost. And this isn't they're sightings of Elvis's ghost, which I think is somewhat less disrespectful because you're well, he is dead, and this is sort of a weird way to say he's still alive in spirit, or just to kind of keep the memory of him alive, to be we saw his ghost here. That's not every time he's brought up in this, they're not saying that. They're saying he was there and he was alive and he had faked his death.
Yeah, I physically saw him breathing, and
still looked like Elvis. It hadn't changed anything.
Yeah. So this sequel book that she's written, The Elvis Files, ends up bringing in a lot of the information that we're going to see today on the Elvis Files TV show, and the reason for that is that she has this plan for a multimedia prong of products. There's not only this TV special and the book itself, there's also a separate, I don't want to call it documentary, but there's a home video that basically all of the pre-recorded recreations and anything pre-recorded that we see that doesn't feature Bill Bixby are reused from this taped program, also called the Elvis Files.
It's quite a lot of that. That's a lot of the footage.
That's how they were able to make this so quickly and cheaply, is that they're reusing so much.
Yeah,
that makes the calls make more sense. Because the fact that they had telephone stuff, because they were it feels like now that they were padding for time.
Oh yeah.
To just to have an excuse to make this special.
And this constant device too of I'm interviewing you now. Let's now run some footage of when I interviewed you earlier.
Yeah, it was really weird.
Yeah, it's very strange. But that explains that, right? Because they've got this preset product and they're just padding it for live TV.
That's so lazy. It's like, I'm interviewing you and here's footage of me interviewing. They don't just do the interview again there for the people who came to watch. Like, they don't just come up with new questions. They were like, yeah, we have B-roll of this. Let's just roll that.
Yeah, here's what I said to you earlier. It's very strange.
I think it's one we prepared earlier.
So the executive producer on this VHS program is the same guy who produces this television special, a guy by the name of Mel Bergman, and the narration is done by a guy by the name of Ed Hopkins, who I believe is also the narrator on the Elvis Files TV special. And all of this is planned by Gail of, like, we're going to do this special. She is credited as the writer on the Elvis Files TV special. And so early 1991, she announces to all of her newsletter fanzine followers that they're going to do this big TV special in August at the Imperial Palace Theater in Las Vegas. And she specifically invites the readers and subscribers to go with her there, invites them to basically pad out the audience. And she also gives them advance notice of the call-in telephone number. So when you watch this special, it's worth noting that a lot of, like, there are moments when Bill does the little theatrical thing of, like, let's ask the audience what they think of is Elvis alive, or how would you say this? They're already pre-inclined to agreeing with that more than the general public.
That sucks so much. Like,
Yeah.
Well, I get. Well, no, you know what it is? Is it outs itself as not credible because at the beginning. Oh, if you think about, like, why anyone would ever show this information to the public, right? Like, why have this special? Why put it on TV? Like, what are we trying to say? And the moment you have a believability counter at the beginning of how many people believe this, and we're going to check in at the end and see how many people we've convinced, then it's like, well, that's what your show is about. Like, you're showing that it's not about the information. It's not about what's true or not. Your main priority is convincing people that you're right, which is not credible. Like, that's just, it just sort of shows what this all was from the beginning, especially if you're loading the audience who are ready to, like, kind of put their hand up. It's probably more so at the end, to kind of convince any audience members who are there of their own volition to put their hand up as well. It's like that whole, like, the teacher holds up, like, a triangle and is like, who thinks this is a circle? And if everyone in the class puts their hand up, you suddenly start to, like, lose confidence. And you're like, oh, maybe it is a circle, and you agree with them.
Yeah. It's
sort
like
of
an
a peer
intellectual
pressure type thing.
The whole thing is like an experiment. Like, how feasible can we make this appear to you and possibly sell you more stuff? Like, can we convince you of this? Yeah.
Yeah, it really felt like I was watching a Darren Brown special, like where he's, like, using mentalism to, like, be like, and then by the end of this series, like, you'll believe you'll have seen a ghost. Like,
and who's shepherding us through this but Bill Bixby as well, which is so strange.
So weird.
Yeah. He gets hired in June 1991 for the August broadcast. What has Bill Bixby been up to since Clambake? Like, obviously we know he was Hulk. He was Dr. Banner on The Incredible Hulk. And then he has this whole, like, next part of his career where he is basically directing a lot of TV shows and TV movies, and has a fairly extensive resume of directorial credits.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing I didn't tell you, Felix. The whole time that he made the Elvis Files, all through the filming of this, he is dying of cancer.
What?
Yeah. So he's just found that out, I think, a few months to a year before that special was aired.
Oh, my God.
This whole time. So he knew Elvis, and he's doing this knowing that he is dying. It's very strange.
Wow.
So, like, he's just been divorced as well. I think that had just happened before this. Like, he had the cancer diagnosis, he was divorced, and then he did the Elvis Files. So he's maybe the most fascinating figure of this whole story, because why did he take this gig? There's a few different things you might think. You might think, well, did he get sucked into the conspiracy theory himself? Like, did he think there was something to it? No, it doesn't seem like it, because he did a Maryland one later as well, and he was going to sign on to do a whole series of like investigations into celebrity deaths as far like
the Maryland Files. Yeah,
the Maryland Files. Yeah, he did that as well. And was he just a jerk? Was he just a bad guy? And that doesn't seem right either. It doesn't seem.
It doesn't track.
Like everyone seems to no. Like, so why? Like, that's the real mystery of this.
The only theory that I could come up with is like just going off of what you've said so far is like, you know, you get diagnosed, you get divorced, and like people in that space, like that some can react in that way of like, well, I gotta keep busy, I gotta keep doing things. Yeah. Because if I sit and do nothing for, you know, they go into work mode. So maybe it was just sort of like, it's like, well, I gotta, you know, fuck it, I'll do whatever. Like, and also a bit nihilist, I guess, if you're going like, well, I'm dying, I don't really give a shit. I want to stay busy. Cool, I'll do that. I'll do this.
Oh, he fully was the work mode guy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah, he was doing way more work than you would think. He was working as much as he could.
I mean, I don't know why he doesn't think he would have to take this.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. You know, there's work and then there's this, though. You know, right, I mean, this is really like, you know, grave robbery sort of stuff. It's very strange.
I don't know. Like, this is a hard one, because I was like, if I was in a similar position, like I'm trying to think like what would convince me to do it, and it's like maybe I actually don't think this would work on me. Like if it's like, well, everyone else here, it's like maybe I could be a voice of reason in this chaos that's going to get made whether or not. I don't think he really was that in this, but he did occasionally bring in sort of like the voice of reason, like to some of the, like, to some people's stuff, like not as much as I would have liked.
That's one thing that Bixby offers, is that he offers a sort of credibility to the whole proceeding in a way that Gail didn't have even in 1988. You know, she was coasting on the credibility of, I've made appearances on well-known TV shows. You know, haven't you heard of this show? You know, haven't you heard of, you know, Oprah? You may have seen me on Larry King, but I'm the one with all the information. Well, now that it's coming out of the mouth of Bill Bixby, even though she's sitting there on stage with him, she's credited as the writer on the special. It lends the whole proceeding a lot more credibility. But the one thing that he does get allowed through, because as I understand it, in the negotiations of how things would go down, he asked and was granted the ability to basically compose his final closing thoughts for the special. And as we'll see as we get through it, he does talk about, like, when I saw the evidence, it was, you know, I was convinced that, you know, the story had to be told. And to be fair, as we'll get into, there is one big story that comes out of the Elvis Files that is kind of indisputable in terms of the fact that it comes from a pretty well-sourced source of information. It's just presented completely fucked. And it is actually something that has never really been talked about before in the Elvis world as actual history, as part of Elvis's life story. And I'm really excited to tell you guys about it, because Felix, I know you have no idea what I'm talking about.
I'm literally like, because you said just then, you're like, the way it was told was fucked. Because I was like, which part is he talking about? Then you said that, I'm like, I have no way of knowing.
And just before we started recording, I did think, like, wouldn't it be funny if after all of this time, this record is the one in which we look at the evidence in a slightly different way and realize Elvis actually is alive? You know what I mean?
Well,
like we were just missing something, some little thing the whole time.
Justin pulls up a mask and he's like, I've been here the whole time.
No, definitely. I mean, I can see when we get to the later section of the show, if Bill was in good faith looking at the evidence, there's some of the evidence that's pretty indisputable, but it's not evidence that Elvis was alive. It's evidence about something completely different. So obviously, Bill gets hired on in June 1991. They do a ton of press. Mel Bergman especially does a ton of interviews with the newspapers and stuff. I found a couple quotes real quickly from the producer. He gives an interview to the Tampa Bay Times and says, "Do I believe Elvis is alive today? No. Do I believe Elvis died on the day they say he died? No. I never personally believed he was alive until and then as I spent 3 full days with Gail Brewer-Giorgio in Georgia, it became quite clear that there is a mystery here. There are enough unanswered questions I felt that could make a terrific TV program." And then another quote from the LA Times. "Is it a little exploitative? Yes, it is," said Elvis Files producer Bergman. "But there are compelling elements that create a terrific story that is not bogus, and is my job to make it as good a show as I can make."
My job not to get the information out there or to present, but to make a good show.
Yeah.
Like to make entertainment is what
to
my
make
job
entertainment,
is.
and to sell advertisements.
Yes.
I found a review of this from when it aired. This aired internationally, by the way. This went to the whole world.
That's right. You were saying that you found a version that was dubbed in Japanese.
In Japanese, yeah. I found a Japanese dub of this. It went to a lot of different countries, yeah. And I found a review from The Age here in Australia from when it aired, where this guy just pointed out the use of the word files. I was just this one thing that stood out to me. He said the title is typical of classic bunk. Files sounds authoritative. It implies we're going to get a look at secret information, which will then reveal all. It's true, eh? Even that, it implies that there's some secret message in these. He's holding a manila folder.
Yeah,
big top secret stamp on it.
Yeah,
confidential.
It says we got told of sightings as if Presley were a UFO. It's true, eh? It's so disrespectful.
So the other thing that's kind of interesting that I found out is that there are multiple versions of the special, not just the other international dubs, but there was, after the special aired, a home video version of this that's truncated. It's cut down to 53 minutes long and basically cuts out anything and everything that indicated that it was a live broadcast. So all of the telephone calls to the hotline, any time that the narrator says "tonight," all of that's cut.
He's barely in it at that point.
Yeah,
that's most of what he does.
So they really wanted to push the Elvis Files line of products to the point that they even sold a version of this special on tape later.
Wow.
So, but the one that we're watching for this is the TV broadcast version, which runs an hour and 23 minutes. However, does not include the commercials. Which is a shame because we've gotten so much fun out of those.
Yeah,
it is.
Commercials are banging.
Well, the commercials will return in the Elvis Conspiracy next time. We'll have some fun with that. They're from the Aussie airing as well, which is
brilliant.
Yeah,
I think the reading writing hotline ad and the
This is something we'll come back to later, but without the ads, this makes less sense because if you see it as all of this is just an attempt to get you to watch some ads, then it's like, oh, I see what this is. You're just kind of using him as something to draw people in to get them to watch, which is, in a certain lens, is what all commercial entertainment
all television,
is. Yeah, but this is just more obvious. Yeah.
It's just trying to sell books as well.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and dive into the Elvis Files. It opens with the first recreation from the original VHS program. You see an actor actors generally portraying Joe Esposito and Ginger Alden, and also actors playing the EMTs attempting to rescue Elvis.
On August 16, 1977, paramedics were dispatched to Graceland. Elvis Presley's girlfriend, Ginger Alden, was there at the time, along with one of Elvis's closest friends, Joe Esposito.
And they're so bad.
Yeah. I love this whole thing. It's a very 90s, very TCBcast After Dark thing of reenactments.
Yeah.
It's such a 90s thing. I feel like you don't see reenactments anymore. I don't feel like that's
really.
kind of survived into the
Parody
2020s.
now.
Yeah, and I love to when it's such a recurring thing on this show in particular, when they're showing you footage of something that there was obviously no cameras for.
Yes.
And then they're like dramatization. It's like, oh, who's out there that thinks that they had a camera crew ready to go in the 70s?
There's big letters across the bottom. This is a dramatization of the events depicted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we get into the intro montage, I guess you would say.
Yes, and it happens quick. And I spent some time breaking this down because it really happens so fast. And it's trying to throw information at you too quickly for you to process it. I think the first thing that is wrong or at least misleading is when they say the circumstances of his death have been shrouded in mystery, which is a half-truth at best, because no, they haven't. Like, not really. They've actually been very well documented.
Yeah.
As John was saying earlier, like one of the most documented deaths in history ever. The way that they illustrate the mystery is they do a couple of things really quickly. They show you there's like headlines like spinning into frame, and they do the front page of the Weekly World News, which is a joke paper, basically pretty much the Onion of its time. They show you the book Elvis, Where Are You?, which was produced by the same guy who made the David Darlock tape, Steve Chanzers. And then they show you an article that's headlined, Is Elvis Dead or Alive? Some say yes, some say no. And I found that article. It's from the Daily Oklahoman.
Of course you did.
22 July 1988. And that article has an interview with the guy, a guy from the local fan club, and who says no, he's obviously dead. And interesting, but that guy does say that he thinks the Darlock tape is real, but that it's edited somehow. So he was fooled by the tape. But he does overall conclude that no, Elvis is not alive. That's ridiculous. He said this, and he says that article that spins into frame for half a second as like, oh, this is evidence. He says someone's just trying to sell a book. Like,
yeah. In the clip that they're putting on the screen.
Yeah.
Like I said, like it's that mentalism stuff where they're just like, they flood you with information that don't give you the time to process it, so that you think you start to think you're being convinced.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Yeah, you don't have the answers. Like, be like, oh, like they had the answers. It's like, no, they didn't. They told you that they did, and they showed you a bunch of pictures.
Or it doesn't even really matter if you're convinced. What matters is that you're like, wow, what? Maybe? Like, what's all this?
Yeah.
Like, I guess this is interesting.
Yeah,
I'm going to sit here for the next 2 hours.
It's trying to draw you in.
Yeah.
Ask questions, yeah.
Oh.
And then they also say that proves that Elvis Presley was more than the king of rock and roll, which means nothing at all.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, what they're implying is that they're going to prove that he's a secret agent.
Yeah, but even that, like...
But that's not even to say... Like, you can still say that. That's irrelevant. I guess it technically becomes relevant of whether he's alive or dead, but at that point in it, it's just saying, like, oh, he was more than what we thought he was. And he was like, cool, I thought we were here to sort of learn if he was dead or not.
Yeah, like, you've set the bar so high, you should have more than you're claiming. And then we get this montage of stock footage as well, and it's super quick, because we've got someone in a DEA jacket getting into a helicopter, we've got a cassette playing audio from a cassette deck, and Elvis's police badge, which we'll get into, and then I love the dramatic footage of the cassette player that comes back. Yeah. It comes back later on, I think, and they've got like a smoke machine behind the tape deck. Like there's like purple haze.
Really playing up the drama.
I started traveling. Who was this mysterious phone caller? Captured in a conversation recorded in 1981. Why is Elvis Presley's name found on over 1,400 pages of FBI documents? And why are some of these documents still classified? All this and much more tonight. Tonight, live from the Imperial Palace Hotel and Casino and the Legends in Concert showroom in Las Vegas, in a television exclusive, the real story behind the event that shocked the world.
The Elvis Files.
And then this dramatic tone shift suddenly from this, like, this is an investigative journalism show that's going to blow the lid on this, to, like, this garish pink rock and roll.
90s.
So
like,
90s. It made me think, like Sailor Moon growing up has that, like, after the episode, they had, like, Sailor Says, where she gives you advice, life advice, but it's in that, like, bus seat print with, like, big pinks and blues in the background, and she's just like, hey, if your friend is seeming sad, you should ask them if they're okay. Like,
it suddenly is that kind of shift. This 50s, 90s kind of CC Rider style music. And it's sort of like, it kind of raises the question, like, is this a serious show or not? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, are we...
Yeah, that bit feels so not serious. Yeah. It's like the music changes, the graphics, it's everything. It's like a Saturday morning. Yeah.
It feels like it's really, like, almost making fun of the audience at that point, you know? And making fun of people who are genuinely engaged with this. Like Elvis fans who are really honestly watching this thinking that they might turn out to be alive. It feels like it's just like messing with them to suddenly, here's some other shit that you like. You like hot pink 50s crap and like a cheap version of CC Rider, you know? Like, and then they also brushed past this really quickly as well. Recorded live from the Legends in Concert showroom in Vegas.
Yep.
So this is a stage. What that is it's a stage used for Elvis tribute artists, and they've booked it for one night.
Oh,
and others like it. The Legends in Concert. They had Marilyn Monroe in later years. They like after Michael Jackson passed away, they added Michael Jackson impersonators. I think there's usually a Sinatra impersonator. Yeah. It's like the big legendary stars. In fact, they're still going on, if I remember correctly. Because I'm looking at their website right now. Yeah, they're Elvis, Michael Jackson, the Blues Brothers.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's an act that'll be evergreen in Las Vegas. But we're gonna do some investigative journalism and blow the lid on this very serious story from this stage.
Yeah. I guess you've got your audience. Like they're already showing up to watch Elvis impersonators, so like they clearly like Elvis. So you have a show about is Elvis alive? Like for the half that isn't filled by Gail's fans, and her
just
like
people off the street.
It'll be people who already they know that they have an audience in that specific area, who are going to want to like fill the other seats.
Yeah.
And then those people probably have credible, like, Elvis knowledge, and then they can tell their friends that Elvis is alive at the end of it when they're definitely convinced.
And then we're introduced to the man himself, Mr. Bill Bixby.
Yeah, and so quickly, too. Again, that's something else that happened so fast. It's like, here's Bill Bixby, who you also kind of know and trust to some degree.
Yeah, true. If you watched a lot of Elvis and you knew about it from that, you'd be like, hang on, like, after all of that, on top of that, you're like, oh, wow. Like,
and
really
then he's a guy that
anything.
And then he's a guy that actually knew him.
Hello and welcome to the Elvis Files. Now, the stage was Elvis Presley's second home. He spent much of his life performing live to millions of his adoring fans. But we're here to look at another side of Elvis. F. Scott Fitzgerald once said, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in one's mind at the same time." Well, that's what we're asking you to do.
Bill introduces the show by giving a quotation from F. Scott Fitzgerald. And you did some digging on this, Rabia, to provide some context, because what he says is it's this idea of the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time. And he takes that out of context from where it originally came from.
Well, that's right. So what it's supposed to do, and this is also in that review in The Age by Dennis Pryor from after this aired, he talks about that quote. "This is showbiz hype and skeptics had better keep away. We skeptics were put in our place by the repeated statement that the real test of intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time." Yeah, like what he's trying to say is like, well, if you know, what I'm asking you to do is just give this a chance. Because isn't that what a smart person would do?
Yeah.
You know, and if you're not going to give me the time of day, then I don't think you're really that intelligent, is basically what it's saying. But here, so this idea, and F. Scott Fitzgerald, who is somehow being dragged into this, F. Scott Fitzgerald, legendary author of The Great Gatsby and Tender as the Night and all this stuff, and someone who people think of as an intellectual, as if like, oh, well, he's saying that you should consider, that you should take this seriously. But so this quote, I looked into this. It's from an essay called The Crack Up that he wrote in 1936, and it's about having an emotional breakdown, a mental breakdown in your 30s. And he's saying that he was like a cracked plate, like he dropped this ceramic plate of his mental health, and it shattered, and he had to like piece it back together. And it's quite a beautiful piece of writing. So I'm going to give you the real context for this two opposing ideas thing. So this is what he says. This is what he said in 36. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. One should, for example, be able to see that things are hopeless and yet be determined to make them otherwise. This was a philosophy that fitted onto my early adult life when I saw the improbable, the implausible, and often the impossible come true. Life was something that you dominated if you were any good. Life yielded easily to intelligence and effort, or to what proportion could be mustered of both. But 10 years this side of 49, I suddenly realized I had prematurely cracked. Now, a man can crack in many ways. He can crack in the head, in which case the power of decision is taken from you by others, or in the body, when one can but submit to the white hospital world, or in the nerves. It was my nervous reflexes that were giving way, too much anger and too many tears. I had weaned myself from all the things I used to love. Every act of life, from the morning toothbrush to the friend at dinner, had become an effort. I saw that for a long time I had not liked people and things, but only followed the rickety old pretense of liking. I saw that even my love for those closest to me had become only an attempt to love, that my casual relations with an editor, with a tobacco seller, the child of a friend, were only what I remembered I should do from other days. All in the same month, I became bitter about such things as the sound of the radio, the advertisements in the magazines, the screech of tracks, the dead silence of the country, contemptuous at human softness, immediately, if secretively, quarrelsome towards hardness, the night when I couldn't sleep and the day because it went toward night. I slept on the hard side now, because I knew that the sooner I could tire that out, even a little, the sooner would come that blessed hour of nightmare, which, like a catharsis, would enable me to better meet the new day. So here we see that the two opposing ideas that he's talking about are more like philosophical ideas, a kind of outlook on life. He's talking about like holding on to hope in dark times where it's like, yes, I'm depressed and things are bad. Also, I'm optimistic and things might get better. And let's hold these two ideas. He's not saying that, well, one of those ideas should be that Elvis died and the other should be that he chose to fake his own death on the toilet. Like that is a real corruption of that idea.
They were really picking and choosing with that one. Wow.
Yeah.
God.
That's crazy.
What a relatable piece of text.
No kidding. It's what, like, all of us being millennials just, hitting that age now.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? And it also, the irony, too, is that I thought it probably would be quite relevant to Elvis as well. I feel like he would relate to a lot of what we just talked about. Yeah, and the sort of loneliness of his... Because there was another part that I didn't read. I sort of picked just some of my favorite parts that flowed the best as one thing to read out. But there was a part where he talks about, like, becoming a successful writer and realizing that there's only so much happiness you can kind of get from that. And being at the top of your field kind of only gets you so far. And I thought... the irony is this. Maybe this does sort of explain a little bit about how Elvis actually died. You know what I mean?
Wow, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Honestly,
like,
it kind of takes the humanity out of itself, I suppose.
But there's no way they thought of any of that.
No,
they definitely they just wanted to be like, hey, hear me out, like,
hear me out,
yeah.
Now, during this show, we're not going to open any vaults. We're not going to dwell on the Elvis that the world knows so well, the singer, the musician, the actor, and the star. Instead, we're going to show you an Elvis that you never knew before, a man who may have risked everything for the good of his country.
We've brought together a panel of experts who think there was a whole lot more to Elvis Presley than meets the eye, and they're going to share what they know with you tonight. We've set up a special 900 phone line because we want your questions, input, and observations. In a few minutes, we'll tell you how it works.
Well, keeping in mind that Gail is putting the words into Bixby's mouth, I like that knowing what we know of the last 2 episodes that we reviewed of Geraldo Rivera's show, that she takes a snipe at Geraldo Rivera by basically having Bill say, oh, there's not going to be any, vault openings or anything like that. Because that's obviously a reference to Geraldo Rivera's sort of anticlimactic live opening of Al Capone's vault, which famously didn't have anything in it. So they're trying to say that, what we have is real. There's not, empty hype behind this. In a way that
say that, but like. If you open up an empty vault on stage, clearly you hadn't opened it before then, because otherwise you probably would have put something in there. Yeah. So technically it is more credible than this one.
Oh, much more. Yeah, because he told the truth. If anything,
exactly,
it's
the truth. Credible. It might have been boring and anticlimactic, but it was honest.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a great podcast about the whole Al Capone's vault thing. I think it was Decoder Ring. I think Decoder Ring did an episode on it, on the whole saga of the vault, and it actually kind of, from what I remember that show, it was really good for his career, and it ended up facilitating his comeback because it put his name back in the headlines, and people kind of, yes, it did make it into a running joke that followed him for the rest of his life, but it was sort of, people found it kind of endearing that, you had to go, and there was nothing there, and at least you sort of told the truth about it.
See that?
Yeah. Whereas, and I think also him being someone who was relatively committed to truth-telling with the Elvis stuff probably helped his career as well. So it's kind of, it's not, he's way more credible than Gail.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah. I never knew that, though. I never knew that was the, Capone's vault was like I never knew that about that.
An actual thing. Yeah. So there's a tease of the 900 number, and they show what presumably stock footage of people, like ladies sitting there ready to answer the phone calls, and then and then we get basically a montage of like a flashback to the tragic day that Elvis passed away.
Yes,
and. It's overlaid with this creepy music as if to imply that something seedy is happening as the casket is being, taken into, the initial mausoleum where Elvis, was buried before he was moved to Graceland. And they even interview Elvis's cousin, Gene Smith, or they have an interview clip from Gene. What did you guys think about this?
Well, it's interesting how they lead up to that, because they start off with this, let's go back to that tragic day, which... it implies that he died that day, but okay, whatever. But and then we get this sort of sincere, music that's like a trying to sound like "Are You Lonesome Tonight," but isn't. There's these sort of chords, sort of sentimental, like chords, like country music kind of chords playing over all these fans earnestly talking about their reaction. I think the most telling moment is when someone says, "He's a guy that shouldn't be dead today." Just like, this shouldn't have happened. I agree. But it's like you've taken that reality and you've made it, you could also interpret that as, if he was alive, he could still be making us money. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And then we get then it sort of slowly turns into footage of the funeral, and then they fade up this supernatural kind of X-Files kind of music underneath the footage of the coffin, which implies he was placed in a casket, no cameras were allowed. Like, what are they hiding? Like, what are
a dead body?
I know, it's of course. And then and that builds to this, and then silence. We go from the fake "Are You Lonesome Tonight" to X-Files music, and then silence. Like, let's listen to Gene Smith here. Let's see what Gene Smith has to say, because I bet it's revealing.
When we viewed the body for the last time, I stood there quite a while looking at his hands, and of course he was always breaking bricks with his hands. He had calluses on the bottom of his hand and big old rough looking knuckles. His nose looked kind of puggy looking, and his right sideburn was sticking out, straight out looked about an inch. And his hairline looked as if it had been a hairpiece, something glued on somewhere. It just didn't look right.
This feels really exploitative to me. This feels predatory.
Yeah.
This, where he says he doesn't think it was Elvis in the coffin, but he seems to be saying that in such a manner where he's talking about like being in shock or something, or I don't know. I mean, how did you guys feel about this?
So to give a little context, Felix, on who Gene Smith was as Elvis's cousin, he was Elvis's real first cousin, but he had not actually been as close with Elvis basically since the early 60s. They had been really close through childhood, teenage years, and Elvis's early career, but then there was an event where some jewelry went missing in the early 60s, and Gene kind of got fingered for it. Turns out it had just been misplaced, but it caused enough bad blood that Elvis had blamed Gene for it, that they just sort of went their separate ways. And they basically didn't really spend as much time. Gene was not around in the last few years when Elvis was getting really in bad health. So the Elvis of his memory was probably not as fresh in the mind as what Elvis, how bad Elvis looked by the summer of 1977. And so Gene was, because he was his cousin, was invited as a pallbearer to be there at the funeral and to carry the coffin. But as we'll find out on the next TV special, the Elvis Conspiracy program, where they interview Larry Geller, who talks about what was happening with the sideburns, because Gene is he kind of talks about didn't quite look like him, and maybe the sideburns could have been glued down or something like that. And Larry talks about, both in that and in the Death of Elvis book, it also I think gets mentioned, but it was hot, it was the Deep South in the middle of August. And Elvis had landed in an unusual position when he died, so obviously his face was sort of fucked up, not in a bad way, but he definitely did not land in a quote-unquote natural position, like a sleeping position, and that affected how he looked after he died. And so trying to make that all fit right. But the other thing that doesn't really get talked about is that Elvis's hair was going white by the end of his life, just like his dad's, but Elvis dyed his hair black. And what it seems like, as Larry describes later, Elvis's hairdresser, he just added a little dye to Elvis's hair, and that's what was wet.
Yeah, I mean, because that's what I was thinking while watching this, is they're it doesn't look like him, and it's it's have you ever been to any wake before? It's dead bodies don't look like the live body, and also there's coffin dressing. So sometimes it really depends on who you get, but sometimes that can go very strangely. Especially if someone has died in an awkward position, it can be very awkward to try and put that back together for to be presentable in a wake. Right. And also even on top of that, the way he says I just don't believe it was him. But it's the same thing as he shouldn't be dead, where they take the words of something and then the show frames it as though the tone was completely different. Because he says it like how anybody might talk about a dead relative being if they saw him I just didn't believe it was him.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's you don't literally mean that. You don't because if he literally meant it, he would have been I didn't believe it was him. I think something's up. You would say it that. You wouldn't say I didn't believe it was him. You'd be yeah, me neither.
The way they present it too is they've gone from using music to emotionally manipulate you and imply things without saying that, to using silence in the same way. Because they say.
Oh yeah, you go. Sorry.
Oh, because they say, as he says, I just didn't believe it was him. And then there's this moment of silence. There's this beat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, doesn't that say it all? That's the...
yuck. Yuck.
So we go back to Bill in the studio, and then he introduces a clip of himself interviewing Maria Columbus. Pre-recorded. And it's interesting the way that he words this. He's scripted as introducing her, and he says that Maria is the president of the Elvis Presley fan club. Now, this is important. There were literally hundreds of Elvis Presley fan clubs. They're trying to make it seem like she's the president of, like, the single most important one, and that's just not true. We've been introduced to Maria earlier in the story. She was the president of the Elvis Presley Special Photo Association. Like, it was just called, like, in short, it was called the Elvis Special Fan Club. And it was a niche fan club that was basically, after he died, completely made up of Elvis conspiracy theorists. Like, that's really all it was. Oh my
God, really?
So she's the president of the Elvis Presley conspiracy fan club is what she actually is.
Yeah. And even then, even if she wasn't, even if it was a more reputable club, like, still, she's the president of a fan club. Like, that means nothing.
Yeah, I keep wondering from, like, a lot of these, like, because I don't think that's really a thing anymore, but, like, it feels like for a lot of, like, because Sinatra had fan clubs, and there was always, like, president of fan club. I'm wondering, was it ever, like, a reputable, like, source, or has it always just been a bit silly? Because to me, it always seems silly, but I'm like, maybe it was a different time. Maybe fan clubs knew shit that no one else did. I don't know.
I mean, in this context, about, like, is he alive or dead? And then,
yeah.
Like,
because I kind of believed I believed them when they were like, oh, the president of the fan club, but I had that two things in my head where I was like, okay, so because I was like, this must be the president of the main fan club, because they don't go into and say it's like, they don't tell you the specifics, because why would they? It goes against their cause. But then I was like, but she is just a president of fan club. Like, is that doesn't seem like reputable to me. That seems like she's just nobody.
And the way that they've framed it too, a big part of why these conspiracy theories flourished is because the fans all felt that they had some personal connection with Elvis, as a lot of us do, and but most people are sort of sensible enough to know to sort of park that emotion as just, well, it's just how I feel when I listen to his work, and artists connect with their audience, but I don't actually know the man. Most of us are sort of reasonable about that connection that we all have. But a lot of these people were really so personally invested in him. And then when he died, they're kind of thinking, oh, this means I didn't know him as well as I thought I did. There must have been things going on I didn't know about. There's people with knowledge, like, I didn't see this coming. There's people with knowledge of him that I don't have. So I could either do some introspection to sort of process my feelings here, or I could act like, no, actually, I am still the one who knows him better than you.
Right.
I still have this insider knowledge as his real friend and fan, because I know he's still alive and you don't. You know what I mean?
Right.
So and they're sort of playing on that by, like, even having a fan as an expert.
Why do you think that Vernon asked you to wait a week before you came there?
He thought that perhaps he felt we would have noticed things, little details that weren't right, and we would have questioned them. And maybe it would have caused an embarrassing moment for the family.
It's just so... I don't want to say it's pathetic, but like, in this case specifically,
it is pathetic. Yeah.
It's just like, and come on.
What's even more pathetic is that, as we know from earlier in the story, is that Maria was one of the two individuals involved in this fan club. Like, the fan club that she ran was responsible for selling and circulating the David Darlock tape originally and the album that he recorded. So, like, she has been in the grift and part of the grift this whole time.
So she's in on it as well.
Oh, yeah.
I thought she was just someone who was kind of naively... No. Nope. She's in on it too.
She is in on it too.
That's so much. That's even worse.
That's so much worse. Yeah, that's terrible. And then her evidence too, which is really disgusting. Let's get into that. Vernon asked us not... I don't know how she even had Vernon's, like, number at all, but apparently she did have some...
Dad?
Elvis Files, yeah, Vernon Presley. I don't know how she had any connection to him at all, but apparently he said to her... don't come for the funeral, come a week later. Which, the fact that he was... Yeah. This is just after death as well. The fact that he was prepared to pick up the phone and talk to fans is a credit to Vernon. That he had any time at all with the world beating down his door. All the media have turned up. His son's just died young. He's just outlived his son. And the fact that he even said turn up in a week, I would have hung up. And
yeah,
again,
no, dude, this is like the part of the special where I think from everything up to this point, I was having a bit of a giggle at and just kind of rolling my eyes. And then this happened. I was like, I'm actually mad now. I'm kind of mad. And I was just like seething in my seat, like, how dare you? That's so awful. Like,
this whole saga has been like that for Justin and I too. It's like there's parts where it's very entertaining and very funny and surreal. And then you're like, wait, that's fucked up, actually. That's really wrong. That you're doing,
fucked up entitled, and they never recognize that. Like, because she's talking proudly about the fact, called up Elvis's dad. Yeah, again, like you said, he picked up, which is a phenomenal effort in times right after his son has just died, to let him pick up the phone while he's being swarmed, no doubt, by, like, news reporters and paparazzi, family, fans, everything, trying to organize a funeral, trying to organize all this. Gets a random call, ends up picking up the phone. It's the president of a fan club, and he gives her the time of day to be like, look, just because she's like, I'll come over right away. And he's like, don't do that. It's so hectic right now. Again, very, very, like, more than reasonable.
Yeah. And he did that with all the fan clubs, not just hers.
Wow. It's like so generous with that.
It's
like,
extremely,
Yeah, I also would have hung up. I'd be like, fuck you, and hung up. But he's like, okay, no. Yeah, come in a week. Again, so generous. I would have said, like, give it a month, like, at least. Or, like a year even. But, like, he's like, no, come in a week. Next week will be less hectic. And she turns that around, makes him a villain, and is like, he was clearly hiding something. Like, that's why he didn't want me there, because he knew that I would know. I would be able to see it with my special fan eyes. And
real fans would know.
Big brain. Oh, and it's so disgusting. Like, the man has lost his son. Like, Jesus Christ.
That's terrible.
I was so angry.
Also, if he had hung up and told her to fuck off, what's he trying to hide? Yeah. And also, Elvis would never have been rude to his fans like that. You know? Like,
definitely don't.
Yeah. So you can't win. You can't win with these people.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gail Brewer-Giorgio. All right, I must ask, Gail, isn't it possible that in the haste of putting Elvis to rest, some innocent mistakes were made?
Well, I think the key word, Bill, is haste. Why the haste in having such a grand funeral? Why the misspelling of a name on a grave? Why the moving of the grave? That doesn't make sense. And I believe that a lot of these so-called mistakes are clues.
After the commercial break, we're introduced now, for the first time properly in the special, Gail Brewer-Giorgio, who's treated like a guest who's been invited on instead of literally the producer and writer of the TV special.
Oh, yeah, right. So that really throws some light on it too. So she wrote this as well. Yeah. And then she's being introduced as if, so this is her script introducing her.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
That's so
I really hate one of the moments I've hated the most of this whole saga has been Gail's reaction to being introduced on this special, because again, all this stuff's already been discredited on TV. Twice on Rivera's show. Yeah, he's and she's gotten this platform again, a bigger platform to the world. And there's this look on her face when she's introduced of like, I deserve this. Like, this is my big moment. Like, like she's become Elvis now. You know what I mean? Like, it's so disgusting.
Like, the world told me that I was wrong, but I showed the world kind of.
Yeah,
energy.
I'm here now. This is my big moment.
I've got the biggest brain in the room.
Like I said before, it's like shooting John Lennon or something. It's honestly, I said this earlier on an earlier episode, but I see it as just a few steps better than that. You've done something really pretty comparable to that in my eyes, of just like, look at you, you're famous, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we then get another pre-recorded interview between Bill and Gail. regarding the variant spellings of Aaron, Elvis's middle name, which we talked about on the Is Elvis Alive episode, so won't rehash too much of that, other than to say I thought it was hilarious that she says that, because she brings up numerology again, because of course she does, but she says that he changed the spiritual vibrations of his letters.
Yeah, what was that?
As you know, Elvis was steeped heavily in numerology, that by adding another A to his name, he changed the vibrations of his letters, and he would have been a higher spiritual number. He would have gone up to a 9.
I thought
go on, Felix, sorry.
All I could think of though while watching this is because my grandpa, his name was misspelled on his gravestone. Is he still alive? Like, does that mean he faked his death too? Like, it's another one of those he signed his own death certificate things where it's well, at what point of faking? Does this have anything to do with someone faking their death? At what point is someone who fakes their death more likely to have a misspelling on their gravestone than someone who didn't? If anything, he'd be there to oversee it and tell them that they've misspelled it because he was alive. But all it told me was okay, 'cause I'm more curious about how this happened more in a production sense. At what point in the making of the grave? Because to me, it has nothing to do with whether or not he'd be alive. It just has to do with somebody fucked up at the gravestone factory.
And he also used both spellings too. And John pointed this out on an earlier episode, which I wasn't there for the recording of this part. But he points out that there are numerous instances of Elvis using the double A spelling as well.
Oh, so it's fine then.
So it's fine. It's completely fine.
His divorce certificate is signed by him with 2 A in Aaron, and we just don't hear about that because it doesn't suit the narrative. So it's just nothing. And also, if it is proof of this theory, it means that he is deliberately leaving clues. He's not just he's not just faking his own death. He's trying to let some people know. Yeah.
Yeah. So we return to the studio. There's a little bit of back and forth between Bixby and Gail, where Bill's sort of going, well, maybe it's just innocent mistakes, and she just throws a bunch of bullshit out there. But then Bill opens it up to the first of the phone callers.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Yes, my question, in the event that Elvis isn't buried in the backyard at Graceland, where might he be laid to rest?
Gail?
I have no idea, because my premise is that he's not laid to rest.
There you go. Do we have another call, please? Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
Hi, Bill. I'd like to know why the reason that you didn't call up Howard Stern today like you promised.
Why I didn't call whom?
Howard Stern, the radio personality. This is Captain Jenks.
Oh, hi. Well, I couldn't call Howard Stern because I was a little bit busy here with about 14 interviews and a show to rehearse and an awful lot.
You lied, Bill.
I did?
Yes, you did. That's very naughty.
Shame on me. Do we have another reasonable caller, please?
Who's the first phone caller, Rabia?
Oh, God. I didn't write this down.
It's Captain Jenks.
Oh, is he the first one?
Oh, I thought he was the second one.
Or was he the second one? Yeah.
Oh, I think
oh, no, because I wrote down the first one, someone goes, where might he be buried? And then she goes, well, he's not dead. And then they go to the next caller, and it's this prank call.
Yeah, Captain Jenks rings in after that. Yeah. And,
who was this? I didn't understand what was going on.
So this guy, he's made a career. He's still around. He's still doing the same thing. He's made I want to say career, but it's just it's just something he does for fun. Is his whole bit is I will prove to you that they don't screen calls properly at various things all throughout history. He's a Howard Stern fan. He listens to the Howard Stern show. So his thing is he will call in to TV networks anytime they take calls from anyone. And he'll be like, yeah, I was there. I saw that thing happen. Or I'm an expert for this. I'm a pilot. I'm in the army. And he uses voice changes and stuff to disguise because people kind of know who he is now. But even at this point, he was really famous for doing this. He would call his whole bit is he wants to make you question what kind of screening process they have and how it's not very good. And Yeah, oh, it's great. And he's still doing this. Yeah, and he calls in and he goes, yeah, no, I was there. I saw the plane get shot down. It was Howard Stern. And they're like, oh, it's that guy again.
He always references Howard Stern.
Yeah, that's his thing. Yeah. So here, he's like, hey, this is Captain J, Bill. How come you didn't come on Howard Stern's show? It's just, he's just showing, like, this is a joke. And it's amazing this went to air.
Yeah.
It really is amazing. He actually made it. He's just
Well, it was live.
He must have just pretended to be a fan and then got through, and then they really did air him just talking this bullshit about Howard Stern. And again, I guess this is not quite his usual gig, because normally he calls into like news shows and things that sort of matter a bit more. But here it's like he's just saying this is a joke, basically. Making fun of the show.
Making fun of both the show and Bixby himself, because he's like, "You lied, Bill. That's very naughty."
Yeah. He even seemed to kind of chuckle at that. I couldn't tell if it was like saving face or if he was like, "This guy's actually kind of funny." I couldn't like.
Yeah.
And for like the next couple questions, like they get questions and Gail basically just says, "Oh, hang in there. You know, we're going to deal with the future." Every single question.
Yeah.
It's just like just keep tuning in.
Just keep watching. Yeah.
Hello, do we have a call?
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, hi. My name is Louis Morden from Hackensack. I'm just wondering, with all the documented evidence about Mr. Presley's drug use and his poor health, how is it possible that the man can still be alive?
Gail?
Well, I think that's what this show is about. So stay tuned, hang in here. You'll get your answer.
Do we have another call, please? Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
Hi, my name is Rose.
Hi, Rose.
I'd like to know, if Elvis is alive, why would he be in hiding?
Very good question. Gail, would you care to answer that one?
That's another question we're going to deal with extensively on this show. It's too elongated an answer to give you now, so just stay tuned.
As a matter of fact, it's a 2-hour answer.
Yeah, it's a 2-hour answer.
And then we're introduced to the next guest after the next commercial break, because Bixby takes us out to commercial, and then we come back and we are introduced to Monty Nicholson, the author of The Presley Arrangement. Now,
this clown, God.
The Presley Arrangement, just for Felix's sake and for obviously our listeners. We talked previously about a guy named Major Bill Smith who wrote a self-insert fanfic about Elvis faking his death, where he himself was a character in the story. That's all the Presley Arrangement is too. It's Monty Nicholson's self-insert fanfic about a fictional retired cop named Mark Howe who takes photos of someone who looks like Elvis leaving Graceland in a helicopter after he was supposed to be dead, and the cop in the story unravels this mystery as it goes along. It's clearly fiction. It's marketed as fiction, but all of a sudden Monty Nicholson is appearing on this stuff, basically trying to claim that he was basing that on a true story, and this is what really happened to him, that, you know, someone sent him proof that they had taken a picture of Elvis leaving Graceland after he was supposedly dead.
At what point is that a cop's job to look into that? Whether or not it's true. Like, I feel like that's a gross mystery. Not that the police would ever use their time well, but like, it's like someone's like being murdered in the next like alleyway over, and he's like, "I'm sorry, someone took a picture that might be Elvis leaving Graceland. I have to go."
It's not in his jurisdiction. He's like an LA cop, so this is Memphis.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this sounds like, because if you go like, oh, like secret pictures of someone might be dead, immediately you go like, oh, like that's probably like a CIA, FBI kind of like gig, not just some random cop. Also, why did he get sent this? Like,
really glad that this book is not on Internet Archive, because otherwise I would have read it. It would have been another episode. We would have had to go through that, you know.
In 1977, Monty was contacted by a man who claimed he worked for Elvis. He also claimed to have taken 2 photos of Elvis boarding a helicopter with government agents after the time of his alleged death. Upon seeing the photos, Monty became intrigued by the possibility that Elvis may have faked his death. He contacted the man with the photos. At first, he denied having them. Then he changed his mind, adding, "It will cost you to see them again." Monty arranged a meeting with him and went to the address he gave, only to find a vacant house. That man has since disappeared. Inspired by this incident, Monty decided to write the Presley arrangement, which tells the story of how Elvis may have faked his own death. The Presley arrangement was published and placed in a major bookstore chain. Strangely enough, soon after the book started to sell, it also started to disappear. Monty continued to research and write about the mystery concerning the death of Elvis. He was contacted by Gail Brewer-Giorgio. During his first conversation, he learned that Gail's book, Orion, had also disappeared from the bookstore shelves. Gail and Monty exchanged information for several months. They concluded that their books may have been suppressed by the same people.
Yeah, and so it's so funny too, like, I wrote this fictional book and then thought that I might be onto the conspiracy of Elvis's actual being alive, and then I found someone in a very sort of like pre-internet, but sort of like foreshadowing the internet moment, like, oh, I found this other nutcase who said the same thing, and now we're best friends. You know?
Well, and the funny thing too is that he basically gives away what the real truth of it is that much like Gail Brewer-Giorgio's Orion, he wrote the Presley arrangement and it didn't sell well, and so he can easily claim, well, they were trying to make it disappear, and it was, disappeared from bookstore shelves, suppressed by the same people who hid the truth about Gail Brewer-Giorgio's Orion book, which is also a piece of shit bit of literature.
There's that moment where I think it's Bixby, says to him, he goes, now, just to cover all bases, are we sure the book just didn't sell well?
Yes! I don't mean to be callous when I say this, but isn't it possible that the book just didn't sell?
Of course, and it's always possible any book wouldn't sell. I called my publicist, and I asked him about this problem. I said, I have friends that are going into the bookstores and asking for my book, and they're being told that they can't even order it. Yet you tell me it's still in the catalog of books in print. He said in 35 years in the publishing business, he'd never heard of such a thing.
I laugh so hard because it's definitely what happened. He's like, no, I saw men in suits come into the library and take it away.
Oh, the men in suits, yeah. Here come the men in black. Yeah, coming to take your book away, your novel.
Yeah, it was too close to the truth. My cop fiction about how I chased down Elvis leaving Memphis was too close to the real thing, so they suppressed it. It didn't just not sell well. I'm a good author. I'm a brilliant author.
If anything, you would want stuff like that out there for plausible deniability, wouldn't you? I mean, isn't that how, how a lot of that stuff actually works, is my understanding, is they would want to have, they want to be like, oh, you don't actually think that episode of the X-Files is true, do you? That's more...
I'd love it if they brought in the bookstore owner of this specific one they're talking about, and they were like, it just no one
doesn't exist. It didn't happen.
No,
they'd have to pay someone to play that part.
And this men in suits came.
They do go to another. So all of this recreation of Monty Nicholson's story of what happened, and then introducing this handwriting analysis guy, Paul Wiest. This is all from the Elvis Files VHS program, pre-recorded, pre-released, everything has already been sold before to people. But this Paul Wiest is introduced to examine the signatures on the death certificate and the life insurance policy. And it's just hilarious because if Elvis was going to fake his death, he was totally going to sign his own paperwork, not pay someone else to do it. And what's funny, so Paul Wiest cross-compares the letters of the signature with the letters on the letter that Elvis wrote to President Nixon, which we'll get to, Felix, because that's a real thing that happened. But you see them overlay with transparent photocopies, and it doesn't even match up in the shot that they show. It's not even close. Yeah. It's not. It's I guess from the sense of they're the same letters of the alphabet of the English language, I guess, but the handwriting is completely different. So that was pretty hilarious.
That's so funny.
And then
all the handwriting expert stuff is
Yeah.
Now, as we've said before, it's important in this story to be able to hold two opposing ideas in your head at the same time. Now, with that in mind, let's take some more calls from our viewers. Hello? Hello out there.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Who are you?
Judy from Austin, Texas.
Hello, Judy.
I have a question. I know if it was my ex-husband or father that everyone was talking about, I'd be upset. Why hasn't Priscilla or Elvis's daughter come forth to deny the rumors that he is alive?
Very good question. Gail, I'd ask you to answer that.
The world was told that Elvis Presley died on August 16th, and certainly Priscilla Presley said that too. But I think later we'll find out when we examine the FBI files why they may not have been telling the whole truth.
All right, it's another wait and see.
Bixby comes back in with that F. Scott Fitzgerald quote again at about a half hour in, and then opens up the phone lines again. And we get a whole bunch of questions from just general listeners. Like, there's one that's about, like, why hasn't Priscilla or Lisa Marie come forward to deny the rumors? And according to the Graceland's documentation, as we talked about on an earlier episode, Priscilla did go out and make a public statement in early 1988. Gail just dominated all of the media that nobody really heard that one.
Yeah, and because they wouldn't want to. Well, why would they want to? Because anything she says is, well, she would say that because she's covering this up, and it's not a good story if he's dead. So it wouldn't. Yeah. And why not exhume the body? And Monty, basically says something along the lines of like, well, there's not evidence of an actual criminal activity, which. True. We head into another commercial break, and Bill Bixby sort of teases that there are going to be reliable witnesses who claim that they spoke and met with Elvis. And as we go into the ad break, there are the results of the initial phone poll that they were also taking, because you could call in and you could either get on the line to potentially be one of the live callers, or you could pay a couple bucks to cast your vote like American Idol or some shit.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Of do you think Elvis is alive or dead? And on that phone poll, as of this commercial break, they say 76% of the callers say that they think Elvis is alive.
And this is a moment in which I hate Bill. This is maybe Bill's lowest point of this whole thing, because it goes to 76% alive. And then Bill laughs and kind of gestures to the crowd and goes, "I love you people." Oh, man, that feels bad. That feels like, wow, you're actually falling for this. Like, we could make some money here. Like, that's what that how else could I interpret that?
All right. I love you people. All right. Now, Gail, you are the person most responsible for this controversial issue of whether Elvis Presley is alive or dead. Now, her story is a fascinating one, and no matter what you believe, it is a story worth telling. Gail, why don't you tell us how you became involved in this case?
Well, I like the rest of the world, heard the news that Elvis Presley died at the age of 42, and I was shocked. When I heard that Elvis Presley had died, I was amazed. It seemed that almost overnight a very mortal man was deified. My curiosity led me to write the novel Orion, a fictitious story.
What's hilarious is they come back from commercial, and Bixby interviews Gail again, but there's an interview within an interview, but then there's a recreation inside of the interview that was pre-recorded.
Yeah, another one. Oh, yeah. So it's interview, and then here's an interview I prepared earlier, and then there's a recreation within that. Yeah. Oh.
And what's hilarious is that you can tell on the recreation part where she's narrating about this, about Orion basically disappearing from store shelves and all of that, telling her backstory. She's reading from a script. You can tell that this is not like a off the top of her head just talking.
Yeah.
Because her acting is so shitty.
Yeah.
That's true.
Gail Brewer-Giorgio is not an actor.
It always has to come back to her and her book. All of this. It all has to be about her. And I forgot this part. So there's the dialogue tape, and then there's also Gail claims that Elvis then rang her.
In October 88, yep.
Yeah.
This was so embarrassing to watch.
Yeah. And they even film a recreation of her, waking up and answering the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoever she got to do this tape, I mean, Bill, in a moment, Bill calls it the best Elvis impersonation I've ever heard. I think it's the worst Elvis impersonation
pretty bad.
I have ever heard. I would even say ever. It's so bad. It's embarrassing. It's not even like the Darlock one where you're like, well, that's a pretty good effort. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's bad. It's only just a guy
doing an Elvis impersonation, yeah.
Yeah, and not even a particularly good one.
Well, maybe you'll be a grandfather one of these days.
Well, I'll definitely be out before I'm a grandfather.
You'd definitely be out?
The dust will settle and everything before then.
Oh,
believe me.
Now, how is the world going to react to Elvis Presley being a grandfather?
That's not a question, it's how I'll react.
People have asked if it was a wax dummy in the coffin, and I laughingly say, well, there was a wick at the top of the head.
Well, thank goodness nobody lit.
The great meltdown, huh?
I just think, like, if she genuinely thought this was really Elvis giving her a phone call, like, think about how she would have presented this if it actually happened and she hadn't staged it. Like, one, the stuff that she's saying is, like, so casual. She's not, like... I feel like if this... Going from her personality of being just wanting to be the person who's like, oh, it was Elvis live or not, she'd be, like, you were asking more questions, wanting to, like, why did you call me? How did you, like, and where are you right about... And she's, like... But she's having, like, a conversation with a friend. She's, like, laughing with him. It's so embarrassing. And also, like, this is just randomly plopped in the middle of this show, and it's never given any more weight than that. This, if it was real, would be the biggest part of the whole show.
The top-level story, yeah.
They would have, like, investigated every fraction of that phone call, but then they just brush over it. Also, they're, like, at one point, like, how did you know it was him? And she was like, well, I gave him questions that only Elvis would know the answer. Gail, you know the answer, and you've never met Elvis. Therefore, anybody could know the answer. And if anybody, either anybody would know the answer, or you made up the answer, because, like, you never talked to him before this.
She never plays any of the questions that he would have only known. That's
but also,
critical.
if she could know it, then anybody could know it. Like, she's not best buddies with Elvis.
She's famously has stated over and over that she was not an Elvis fan.
Yeah, so she's just done her as much, quote, research as she could, which is research that anybody could do.
Right.
So there's no question she could ask Elvis where the answer could be only something that he knows. Because obviously it's out there in the public. Or she could just make up an answer and she's like, yeah, and only Elvis knew that answer. But it's like, no, you're either lying or you're lying.
Yeah, but it has to revolve around her and her ego, you know, and her as an expert. You know, she has to be an expert in this somehow, you know. Yeah. Oh, and there's I was going to ask you about this, Justin. There's a passing reference to something about him faking his own death beforehand to see that he could.
Oh, yeah.
This is based on a real thing, isn't it, where he would fake seizures or something?
Yeah,
What's this all
there's
about?
there's a few. Like, Elvis, I mean, obviously, like anybody, would fake illnesses at times for his own benefit, like getting out of doing things. But he also faked fainting spells to get girls to be vulnerable. He would also fake symptoms to get pills. And, as a prank, is known to have at least a couple times pretended to have been fatally wounded. There was one story where they pranked J.D. Sumner of the Stamps Quartet, and, you know, they sort of had a couple guys pose as, like, gunmen to basically see, like, what would J.D. and the Stamps do, and... You know, if something serious was to happen, and JD jumped in front of Elvis, like ready to take the bullet, and Elvis was just sitting there cracking up, after, like almost immediately after it happened, because you know he realized that they had, you know, he'd gotten a prank over on him.
God, he was going to take a bullet for him though. Jeez.
Yeah. Wow, what a friend. Yeah. So that's the reason they don't elaborate on in the special. It's because it is nothing, just like everything else.
Now, Gail, what makes you think it was actually Elvis talking to you?
Well, I asked him questions that only Elvis would know the answers to. He answered correctly. Plus, it was a very compelling way he spoke. What do you think?
Well, all right. Right now, three possibilities come to mind. First, that you wrote and you produced a phone call yourself in order to sell some books. How would you respond to that?
Well, I can't prove that that's not true, but I can emphatically state it is not true. The call came into my home. I took it. I taped it.
All right. The second possibility has to be that you received a crank phone call from one of the best Elvis impersonators I've ever heard, because I know Elvis, I knew the sound of his voice, and that caller would have fooled me. And, of course, then the third possibility would be that Elvis, in fact, did call you.
And then we're introduced to Kelly Burgess's part of the story.
Yes, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Talk about this, because I have questions.
Well, first of all, just the way they just brushed past Kalamazoo so quickly as well. Like, after hearing rumors he was being seen in Kalamazoo, which we've talked about before on the show, is nothing at all. It's just someone
you told me about
thought...
this.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
saw Elvis at a gas
At a
station.
Burger King.
A Burger King, yeah.
Burger King in Kalamazoo, yeah. And they found out who it was. It was this doctor. It's nothing. Nothing happened at all. But Kalamazoo became this whole thing. But they assume you know that. It's like, they're just like, after the Kalamazoo incident, after the, like, what? And then...
The Kalamazoo Files.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And then we get this reenactment of this bizarre story, this yarn that Kelly, who has died in between this claim and this show going to air. This reenactment of her going into an abandoned office building with these three mysterious men in Kalamazoo, yeah, as well. And she's there because of the Burger King thing. And she walks into this mysterious office building where there are these three, like, men in black sort of figures. She sees Elvis, and they're like, "You've seen too much, ma'am. You have to leave." And guess what? She also has a book to sell, or at least was writing one, but then died.
Yeah.
Ultimately, her tenacity paid off. And amazing as it may sound, Kelly felt for certain she saw Elvis. Kelly was soon ushered out of the building, but she was convinced she had seen Elvis Presley. She decided to write a book that would, in her mind, prove the existence of Elvis. Sadly, Kelly passed away before she could complete her task. Subsequently, all of her notes disappeared.
They even said in the recreation or something, while introducing it, I've got written down, like, at one point they say, Kelly was someone who knew a good story when she heard one. So I'm maybe real, like...
Yeah, it's true.
Just, like,
yeah,
even...
and it mentions, like, that Kelly decided to write a book that would, in her mind, prove that Elvis was alive, and then subsequently all of her notes disappeared. And what it really comes down to, and what when you step back and view this from an historical perspective and find out who all these people are and stuff, what you really realize is that Gail was surrounding herself with other grifters who were want-to-be authors who wanted to get in on the let's sell a book about Elvis faking his death. Like, she was finding like-minded people who wanted to run the same grift as her. That's all it was.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah, all these people have a book to sell.
It is so funny every time a new book gets brought up, even in this special alone. It's like, I didn't actually think about that till you pointed it out now. But yeah, every time it's like a new person gets brought up, it's like, oh, and then they wrote a book. You can buy that. Yeah, we've got them in the aisles on the way out of here. You can just pick up 4 books and buy them all.
I guess because a book is an easy way to have something to sell that doesn't necessarily need evidence, and that sort of anyone can do, and then you own it, and you can say that it's yours. And
they are all like suspiciously like fictional books that like then somehow like got the authors to stumble upon the truth. So it's like they can still label their books as fiction while then outside of that saying like, oh, and it's actually full of a lot of real things that
I changed the names and Now we get a segment on 2 different photographs that are supposedly of Elvis after 1977, one of which we've already encountered, which is the Mike Joseph photo at Graceland from New Year's Eve 1977. We've discussed this. Obviously, it was debunked by Joe Esposito on Larry King's show. And Mike Joseph himself went on record saying, no, it's Al Strada, who was a member of Elvis's entourage. who was just hanging out at the house.
Oh, this one. I hated this part of the thing because, they keep zooming in, like, enhance. And the whole time I was because me and Brown were, like, typing to each other while watching it. And I was like, I wish I could see the Elvis that he's talking about in this photo because I'm just seeing all these blurry pixels.
So blurry.
And then eventually it zooms in on something that, like, might be a person. And all I could think of was, like, one, it's like, that could be anybody. Two, again, how fucking stupid do you have to be to fake your own death and then hang out
at your own house?
In your house, like, just to be like, that's so stupid. Go anywhere else.
And then the other photo, Rabia, who's the other photo that Elvis was taken with?
The
supposedly.
Muhammad Ali photo comes up here, which Muhammad Ali leaving hospital, and there's this dark figure in the background who sort of looks like Elvis. And the most brazen moment of misinformation from Gail here is they're like, oh, okay, so you got this photo of Muhammad Ali, the icon, and then maybe that's Elvis in the background. Has anyone asked Muhammad Ali about this? And she says so quickly, she's like, yeah, they have, and he said it was Elvis.
Well, if that isn't Elvis Presley, it certainly bears a close resemblance.
Actually, that picture was shown to Muhammad Ali. Mm-hmm. He identified it as Elvis Presley. And the picture was shown to Elvis's stepbrother, Billy Stanley, who also said it was Elvis Presley. Is it Elvis? Could be.
Well, now wait. What about Reverend Jesse Jackson? What did he say about it?
As far as I know, Jesse Jackson has no comment.
She's just straight up lying.
Straight up, it's like, you're telling me Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time, you know, the icon, the boxing legend, has been asked, oh, is that Elvis in this photo from the 80s? And he's gone, yeah, it is. Like, I've just casually blown the lid on this whole thing about my friend's fake death because you're the first person to ask me. You know, like
it's one of those other things where she just didn't, like, it's the same thing with the phone call. Like, you need to talk more about this. Like, if this is real, where's your actual evidence? She just casually throws it out there. And, like, it's like so that people can, like, go to work the next day and they'll be like, oh, like, but what about, like, you know, like, I was like, oh, I watched this thing about Elvis. Like, he's still alive. There's a photo of him with Muhammad Ali. It's like, well,
Muhammad Ali said so.
They said, they said that someone talked to him and he said it was him.
If that's true, he should be on the show, or he should be like headline or something. Because the other person in the photo too is Jesse Jackson is also in the shot, and Gail's like, well, as far as I know, he has no comment, which means nothing.
As far as I know, he has no comment.
Because if he said no comment, as in like I neither confirm or deny if that's Elvis Presley. Then that would be something, because that would be like, well, that's weird. Just say it's not him. Like,
no comment. She literally, nobody asked.
No, exactly. She's like, as far as I know, he has no comment. As far as
all of us right here know, he said no comment.
Yeah.
Like, as far as my cat knows, he said no comment.
So, rather than debunking this one right away, Felix, you're going to find out about this one on the Elvis conspiracy.
I can't wait for this.
Next, we get the next round of the David Darlock tape. It's all stuff that we've, like, heard before. It's not even really worth, like, re-digging back into, other than, like, they spend a whole bunch of time here on it, like a good 5-6 minutes, just rehashing a tape that was already debunked at the beginning of 1989. And they never even, like, have Bixby address, like, hey, wasn't this on Geraldo? Weren't you on Geraldo? Didn't the guy who did the Elvis voice appear on that episode of Geraldo with you? Like, that's not even brought up at all.
Oh my God.
So,
in this process, I also requested copies of known tape recordings of Elvis Presley, and I followed the guidelines that were established during the Watergate case for possible authentication of the tape recording. I selected the same words and phrases of the known and the unknown person for comparison purposes. This is the known sample of Elvis Presley stating the word music. This is a sample from the unknown tape recording showing the word music. The formats that were formed fall within the same frequency range through here, which would indicate a match. Basically, the known voice of Elvis Presley compared with the voice on this tape is the same.
The only new bit of evidence about the tape that gets really shown is that for the first time, what she's written about, we get to see where the audio analysis dude is introduced, a guy by the name of L.H. Williams. He claims he's from a police department in Texas and talks about doing the spectrograph on Elvis saying the word music and the David Darlock tape saying the word music. And I
really like music because it's funny because I did actually notice when Darlock is doing his impersonation on the Rivera special, the way he says music in particular, it's like, wow, you really nailed that word.
Yeah.
I really like music. He's got the exact intonation down on that word. I did actually notice that, so I thought it was interesting that that's what they were. But then I think, my understanding would be if you looked at the waveforms of like this right now, like me saying something, you could line it up with you, Justin, saying
so,
and it would look
here's
similar,
something,
wouldn't it?
Here's something interesting. So what spectrographs are is that they measure the amount of energy that's in the different frequency bands. High frequencies are at the top of the scale, lower frequencies at the bottom of the scale. Pitch is indicated by line height. So it's not quite the same as a waveform, but you can basically so I did this. There's in Audacity, you can actually view either the waveform or the spectrogram. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to play you a little clip of something. And you can see, if you look, can you both see that?
Yeah.
You can see that the pattern is almost identical between, this is Elvis Presley up here, isolated vocal from the song Suspicious Minds. And then there's another vocal on the other line. Now, this is clearly Elvis after he faked his death, because as you can see, it's almost identically same. Obviously there's a little bit of background noise on this. Well, that's because there's still a little bit of musical bleed on that isolated track. But this is just a raw vocal, so we have an even cleaner recording of Elvis after 1977 on this second track here. And you can see, look at these, the dark spots almost line up exactly the same. The light spots are almost exactly the same. Let's hear what these two sound like together.
So if an old friend I know stops by to say hello, would I still see suspicion in your eyes?
Now, you want to hear the new past 1977 recording? Here's what this sounds like isolated. So if an old friend I know drops by to say hello, would I still see suspicion in your eyes? It's just me singing badly.
Oh, very good.
And it visually looks identical.
That's so funny. I genuinely didn't think about that until right now, but that's how sound waves work.
Basically what it is, anyone doing a reasonable imitation of the tone and sound of any other recording is going to have a similar spectrograph.
This is a recurring thing as well, is that Elvis's posthumous career seems to, faked death, hypothetical Elvis's career seems to largely consist of him re-recording songs that he did before 77, because anything else would give away that he was still alive, but he is giving away that he's still alive. That's how they justify it. It's so bizarre. But and also not only would he re-record Suspicious Minds, but he would also do it exactly the same way.
Yeah.
What are you saying, Felix?
Oh, I was just thinking, the two truths that we have now is either that, they were lying about the audio, or I was right and Justin really is Elvis. And he's going to take off a mask any moment now.
Well, and those are the two opposing ideas you got to hold in mind, right? Justin is Elvis Presley.
An intelligent person can hold two truths in their mind at the same time.
Now let's assume for a second that this test conclusively proves that Elvis made this recording. Can we be sure that it was made after 1977? We've made a transcription of the recording, and we marked down specific things that the caller said. If any one of these comments describes events that happened after Elvis's alleged death, then the argument that he might still be alive is stronger.
What I thought was funny too is that there's when they're playing clips of some of the Darlock stuff, Bixby at one point says something like, "If any one of these clips is referencing something after Elvis died, then the case is stronger that he is alive." Like that, it references something from after he died is such a low bar to clear. Like it's that whole like, oh, I just heard that the president was shot. Like that sort of thing. It's like, yeah, obviously that happened after he died. That doesn't mean that it's Elvis.
Yeah. That's not where the credibility wasn't, like, we weren't finding it. We were saying that doesn't sound, we don't think that's Elvis.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what he says.
Which, by the way, I mean, I don't know if you'll leave this in or not, but I feel like it just has to be said that, that famous Elvis, that famous David Darlock tape of him saying, "I just heard that President Reagan has been shot." We genuinely just heard that presidential candidate Donald Trump has just been shot as we're recording.
Yeah, just before we went on the air. The ear grazing event. Yeah,
that feels like a very eerie history repeating thing or something. Or maybe not even eerie, just like, well, that is just so apt. That we're doing this.
We get another chunk of live callers, and then Gail and Maria are asked, like, have you taken lie detector tests? And Gail just gives kind of this snarky, like, well, what about? There would be no reason to. I had nothing to do with it. There's no reason to ask me anything.
Yeah, she's just like, I made up the info in my book. And it's like, then why the fuck are we here?
Well,
what are we doing?
Well, I'm not the one that changed the name on the grave. I didn't write the FBI files. So.
And so,
a call from him.
As we're rocking up on the last third of the special, this is where they tease, just before the commercial break, dramatic new evidence. What you don't know is that he may have sacrificed everything for his country.
Now let's make an assumption for a moment. Elvis Presley staged his own death. Why would a man blessed with wealth, fame, extraordinary talent choose to vanish from the public this way? When we return, we're going to present dramatic new evidence that may finally answer that question. Elvis Presley was many things to many people. But what you don't know was that he was a man who may have sacrificed everything he had for his country. Sound unbelievable? Stay with us.
And now we get a pre-recorded segment from the Elvis Files tape claiming that Elvis had received honorary and real credentials from the government, and talking about Elvis's trip to go see President Nixon in 1970, and the narrator dramatically reads parts of Elvis's Nixon letter. Felix, you ever heard about Elvis meeting President Nixon?
No. This, I was like, this is a weird thing to fake, and the longer it went, I was like, getting more confused. So this is a real thing?
This is a real thing.
It is a real thing. Yeah, and I can explain it to you in 10 seconds. Do you remember when Kanye met Trump?
Yeah.
And he was just, like, rambling about all this crap, and Trump just wanted the photo opportunity and wanted the publicity? That's what happened. That's pretty much what it is. It's
so
like
wait, Elvis is Kanye?
Yeah. Elvis wrote this delusional letter to the president.
Yeah, because the letter
I want to be a
nuts.
secret agent. Yeah, and like, say, again, it's exactly like, I mean, Elvis is not exactly like Kanye. However, in this situation, he basically is. It's like, you know how in that Trump-Kanye interaction, how Kanye's like, "Oh, I love you, man," and I'm, this and that, we're going to go to space and all this crap, and Trump's just nodding along.
I'll intervene here because there are fundamental differences, because the presentation is a little different, because Elvis, as we understand it, didn't actually want to make any policy changes or like actually talk about that. He was really just saying buzzwords that would get Nixon's attention, is what it was. Because you have to have the context of that Elvis had a long storied history of hobbies that he would get like super obsessed with, and then he would waste his money, like spend millions of dollars on, whether that was karate or like one time he bought a ranch and bought like dozens of horses and pickup trucks and stuff like that.
Like a rich guy with ADHD. Like.
Exactly. In the early 70s, he got really into collecting police badges and basically like going around pretending like he was like the biggest supporter of the police, and got this idea in his head about getting an agent for the Drug Enforcement Agency, because one of his cop friends showed him, hey, I got this honorary badge from the Drug Enforcement Agency. And just as he runs back home in December 1970, he has an argument with his dad and his wife, and his dad oversees all of his finance. That's an important thing you need to know, is that over the course of Elvis's life, his dad, who had like a middle school education, is in charge of Elvis's personal finances.
Oh, wow.
This will become relevant in a little bit. Extremely relevant in a little bit. And Vernon and Priscilla confront Elvis. You've been spending so much money on all this police, like flying around the country to collect police badges and buying firearms and just being like really obsessed with like wanting to play like cops and robbers and pretend to be a cop. We're like running out of money. You need to curb your spending. And Elvis throws a little bit of a temper tantrum and decides, I'm going to go get this badge that my friend had because that will surely prove to my wife and father that I'm not just wasting all of this money. Like, I can get real credentials, for real. And so he's basically like comes up with this scheme of, I'm going to leave without my like regular guys around me for the first time in years, goes off on his own, travels to L.A., from Memphis to L.A., collects one of his friends out there who works in the film industry, a guy by the name of Jerry Schilling. They fly out to Washington, D.C. and meet with Elvis's girlfriend at the time, because he had a girlfriend on the side, who lived out in D.C., and while he's, there, he ends up making all of these stops, phone calls. He tries to stop in at the offices of the FBI to meet with J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. He rocks up at the White House to try to, I'm Elvis. I'm here at the White House. I want to get a badge.
You're going to say no to Elvis?
And that's when all these memos start flying around in the White House and at the FBI. People going, Elvis Presley is in town wanting to meet the president.
Oh, wow.
And
oh, my God.
They start to develop this idea of okay, so on the plane flight over, Elvis meets with a senator on the plane and asks the senator how should I approach the situation? The guy's like, well, maybe you should write a letter or something like that. So Elvis sits down and writes this letter, and he basically crams this letter with every potential buzzword that he knows will get Nixon's attention, and tries to make this case of the Black Panthers and the hippies and all these, they don't think of me as being part of the establishment,
Yeah, they trust me.
Yeah, they trust me, and so I could really get undercover with them. Never mind, Elvis didn't hang out with hippies and Black Panthers at all. He has no reason to actually claim this. It's not a thing that he did. But he basically writes the most suck-up letter to Nixon you could possibly imagine, hands it over, and it gets taken around to the staff, and obviously he's telling everyone out in D.C. I want to meet the president because I want to help clean up the drug problem in America and take care of these hippies, and the Beatles have really screwed over America, and just it's basically he went and looked at the news of everything that Nixon has said that he hated and was yep, I'm going to list off all these. It's like going to the president and saying here are all your hot button issues and all of your enemies, and let me take care of them. Yeah, exactly.
Again, I think the reason why Trump and Kanye is the easiest way to understand this is because if you were to take, let's say Kanye died in some really obvious way, of an overdose or something, and then we go back to the footage of him meeting Trump and talking about all this garbage and Trump just nodding along, and we go, this is proof that Kanye is now in like deep cover as an FBI agent or something. You know, I mean, it's like,
dead.
yeah, that's basically what's happened. Yeah,
and all it was that basically all of Nixon's advisors, because Nixon didn't really want to meet him at all. He was just like, I don't like Elvis, like I don't have any fondness for Elvis Presley. Yeah, but he was not a Beatles fan.
Well.
But his daughters were Elvis fans, so he agreed on the condition that he would get autographed photos or autographs for his daughters, and also obviously a lot of the White House staff wanted to meet Elvis. So they set up this meeting, and Elvis got in to meet Richard Nixon in the Oval Office, fairly spur of the moment, like considering that this all basically happens over the course of a weekend. They run him through. There's a series of photographs because along the way, one of Elvis's other Memphis Mafia buddies flies in, Sonny West, and Sonny has told the story before in his book, Elvis: What Happened, and various other times. Jerry Schilling has talked a whole bunch about it, and even executive produced a movie starring Michael Shannon and Kevin Spacey called Elvis and Nixon, that tells the whole story.
Yeah.
And that's basically what happens. Like, he goes and
that's so embarrassing.
Elvis basically bullies his way through not a like aggressive way, but he basically sort of like socially manipulates his way into getting an honorary badge for the Drug Enforcement Agency.
Such a nothing story that got so much like importance thrown on it.
Yes.
Seemingly from like to have hearing it from like what it actually is, and then like and then there's this movie about it. It's like, oh my god, like what the fuck are we doing? Like especially putting it through that lens of like Kanye and Trump. But like for hearing it just from what it was, it's like this was just a guy who wanted to meet the president and he was famous, and we cared about it so much.
You know, I think actually it was, Jamie Kay. I think it was Jamie Kay, rest in peace, Jamie Kay, who brought up on TCBcast when the Trump and Kanye meeting happened. This might have even been on the Jungle Room, actually.
I think it was on the Jungle Room. Yeah, it
was Jungle Room. Yeah, that's right. It was a Jungle Room episode, and she said, you know, when Trump met, when Elvis met Nixon, we didn't get the audio. She's like, now with Kanye and Trump, we do have the audio, and it's terrible. And it makes me really grateful we don't have that audio because it's probably not good. Yeah, especially based on the report of what he said. Because there were notes taken about the conversation, and it doesn't sound coherent.
What do you want this meeting to lead to in terms of
honestly, from our standpoint, this was just set up to be a lunch of two people that I like, and I guess they like me. And we're gonna have lunch. We're gonna talk.
You said, I guess you know I love you.
I know.
Did I?
But I don't want to put you in that spot. But.
No, I'm standing in that spot. I love this guy right here. Let me give this guy a hug right here. I love this guy right here.
That's really nice. Come here. That's really nice. And that's from the heart. I didn't want to put you in that position, but that's from the heart. Special guy.
But it is that thing again where it's like, you know, any smidgen of information that these people don't have about his death, it's like, well, we have to fill that in to make it more interesting. Yes, they didn't have the whole conversation, so they made it about spies.
Yeah.
Like, because that's a more interesting story than two guys met and it was really awkward and weird.
In this letter, Elvis volunteered to become a federal agent, saying his contacts with the youth culture would allow him access into worlds that other undercover agents could only dream of penetrating. After the letter arrived at the White House, some of Nixon's aides debated whether it would be in the president's interest to meet with Presley. Here is the memo that decided the issue. Nixon took the advice and decided to meet with Elvis to give him the credentials he wanted. Elvis got his wish. A presidential appointment as a secret DEA agent.
Here's the kicker, though. So the next whole segment of the show is about something called Operation Fountain Pen. And they introduce a guy by the name of Luc Dion, who claims to be basically a former associate of the Canadian government. He seems to be French Canadian. I did some research on this Luc Dion guy because he doesn't really do much in the Elvis conspiracy theory world after this. Like, he kind of is involved in a little bit with Gil, but he basically, like, he appears in this and then he disappears. Turns out, much later on in the 90s, he goes on to be a, like, writer for a bunch of TV shows in Canada, and a director for, like, TV shows about the mafia, and, like, he's just a guy who wants to get into showbiz. And he has a career, like, in the Canadian show business later on. And he's relatively new to the Elvis is Alive scene at the time of this. According to True Disbelievers, the book that we've been using as a primary source for a lot of this Elvis conspiracy stuff, they mention as an aside that Luc Dion was apparently in talks to write a book with Gail about Operation Fountain Pen that didn't come to fruition.
Oh.
And so he was basically just wanting to get on the grift too. But what ends up happening in the special is that they bring some of the only real journalism that's ever been done on Operation Fountain Pen, and they tainted it so badly that Operation Fountain Pen has been left out of the Elvis Presley story for over 30 years. Operation Fountain Pen is real, Felix.
Wait, what?
This is fascinating. So I loved this whole. This is Justin's truth bomb for this episode, which I won't steal the thunder of this. I don't even know half of it. He's told me a little bit, but Operation Fountain Pen is a real thing. That's
You're
the surprise
kidding.
twist.
No.
That's the surprise twist of this episode. But it's a fascinating detail to me that Gail was working on a book and stumbled on something real. And was like, oh, I don't want to talk about this.
Yeah.
No, it's so funny.
And what it is that she wants to talk about it, but she uses it as evidence that Elvis clearly went undercover, because he couldn't just have his name show up in these FBI files because he was a victim. No, he clearly has to have been a secret undercover agent helping out and had to go under the witness protection program. That's what she makes it seem like it's supposed to be.
But by far the longest and most significant document covers the years 1976 to 1982. Containing over 1,000 pages, it concerns a criminal investigation and a man named Frederick Peter Proe.
Over 600 pages of these documents are still classified, but what has been released details a far-reaching sting operation that brought down an organized crime ring that stole billions of dollars from their victims. And the man who may have been an integral part of the success of this operation, called Fountain Pen, was Elvis Presley.
You know what's so funny? Yeah, when this started in the special, when they started talking about this, and then it went longer than I expected, my brain fully shut off because it was so ridiculous sounding to me that I was like, I can't believe they're wasting so much time on something that is so obviously fake.
No, it's
and this
not.
was the real thing.
Yes, this is the real thing.
I assumed it was fake too. But
everyone
Justin's
does.
done a deep dive. Yeah, Justin's done a deep dive and figured it out that
Okay.
it's true. And not only that, but this has not even been told in the Elvis saga. It's been left out of all the big biographies and stuff. And this is like one of the first times it's been properly explored by a like non-conspiracist perspective. Yeah, I know.
Oh my
All right,
God.
so let's get into it. Tell us, Justin.
Okay.
Take it away.
So a lot of my information on this, I got to give credit where credit is due, belongs to a 2017 book written by a guy by the name of David Howard. It's a book called Chasing Phil, The Adventures of Two Undercover Agents with the World's Most Charming Con Man. Operation Fountain Pen was a real FBI undercover operation. There were two cops that went undercover, one by the name of J.J. Weddick and another named Jack Brennan. They went undercover to infiltrate a group of con men that were around the world called the Fraternity.
I can't believe the fraternity's real.
That
sounded so fake.
And what they would do is that they would con high-profile, high-finance targets with these really convoluted, complex con schemes and get money out of them. And they targeted, like, banks, investors, things like that. They didn't target, like, the little guys. Like, it's almost almost Robin Hood-esque, except they didn't they kept the money for themselves. Like it was totally for their own benefit. The pre-recorded segment about Operation Fountain Pen from the Elvis Files explains correctly that Elvis needed to sell one of his airplanes in the mid-1970s. What they get wrong is that it wasn't that Elvis wanted to sell it. It was Vernon Presley, Elvis's dad, who handled Elvis's finances, wanted to sell it. Vernon is not a good businessman, and he is introduced to this man named Fred Pro in May of 1976. This guy talks Vernon into a complex lease arrangement in which basically, let me explain. So I got to back this up to explain how the con worked. So Vernon's trying to offload this plane and find a private buyer. And this con man shows up, and he's like, what I can do is I'll be the middleman for you. I know a guy, another con man, who's going to buy this plane from you for $900,000 on a loan. He'll lease it right back to you so that you guys can keep using it. And you just have to pay him $16,000 a month. Now, here's what I'll do so that it doesn't cost you anything. In fact, you'll be out ahead on this. I'm going to personally, myself, lease it from you as a sublease for $17,000 a month as a charter plane, and I'll make upgrades to the plane and run it as a business. So all I need you to do is give me $320,000, which is the difference between what Elvis owes on the plane mortgage and what the buyer is buying this for. I'll take that money and do the upgrades to the plane, and then every month you just send me your lease check as a formality. I'll send you mine back. You cash it out, and you're coming out $1,000 ahead every single month. Vernon Presley pays Fred Pro $320,000 and then sends this guy checks for months. And the guy's return checks, his return lease checks, keep bouncing. And he keeps making excuses. It's 8 months before Vernon Presley sits down with the FBI. And as far as we know, is presumably told not to tell anyone because there are two agents undercover in this crime ring. As it turns out, Vernon testified in the court case after Elvis died. Now, the arrests and everything didn't actually happen until October, a couple months later. But then Vernon did end up testifying just before he died. I found an article from the UPI, which is a news service, has an article from May 19th, 1982. And it talks about how the defense for 4 of the con artists in this crime ring were facing fraud conspiracy charges in a Memphis federal court. The 4 defendants are J. Lawrence Wolfson, Raymond W. Brasner, Robert Caggiano, and Nigel Winfield. They allegedly transacted an intricate lease-sublease agreement with Presley's father, Vernon Presley, that had the entertainer sell his Lockheed Jetstar to an aircraft company, lease it back, and then sublease it to another company. The prosecutors claimed that during the convoluted arrangement, the superstar was charged for more than $330,000 in repairs that were never made. This really happened. And
oh my God.
Because it was Elvis Presley's money and because Vernon was the victim of it, this was one of the big instigating factors of, okay, we've been following these guys for quite some time and we've had our agents undercover. Let's actually start nailing down these guys and start arresting them and things like that. This operation has been made completely toxic by its association with Gail Brewer-Giorgio and the Elvis conspiracy world. It has been left out of every Elvis biography that covers the 1970s. David Howard's book, again, Chasing Phil, has firsthand interviews. Basically, it's based entirely on firsthand interviews with the 2 FBI agents who were actually undercover on Operation Fountain Pen. Handles all the documentation and talks about Vernon Presley and what all happened with that. Let me just pull up my my clips here. Yeah, so I've got, or not clips, but my clippings from various papers and things like that. The guy that the two FBI agents were following was actually a guy by the name of Phil Kitzer, and he was sort of the ringleader of a lot of this. And the ringleader guy had basically a bunch of promoters, is what he called them, underneath, like kind of henchmen guys that were actually the guys who went out and did the cons. And Fred Pro was one of those guys. And that's how this comes in. So I'm just going to read a little quote from Chasing Phil about the Elvis portion. And this book is over like several hundred pages long, and the Elvis related portion of it actually only takes up like 3 or 4 of the pages. So like there are a lot of cons. There's a lot of what happened to all of the agents. It explains how the lease would work. And then it says, Vernon Presley examined Pro's background and was impressed with his business acumen. A complimentary article about him in Dun & Bradstreet, his college degrees. Presley also received a telex from Phil's Mercantile Bank saying that Pro had the financial wherewithal to close the deal. Phil and Pro had game planned the transaction extensively. The closing took place in June 1976. Phil was home when Pro called from an air-to-ground telephone. Fred, where are you? Phil asked. Pro sounded excited. Phil, we got it, he said. We got it. I'm in the jet. We got Presley's jet. Vernon Presley had also handed over the $338,000 for upgrades, which Pro divvied up amongst his co-conspirators. I didn't put one nut, bolt, or screw on anything on the Jetstar, he later said. Each of Pro's lease checks to Presley bounced. He provided a string of convoluted excuses over the subsequent 6 months, stalling and exasperated Presley while flying the Jetstar around the country as a prop for other cons. Pro's only regret was that he and Phil never met the king of rock and roll. Not because they were fans, but just because it would have made the story that much richer. About 8 months passed before Vernon Presley finally sat down with the FBI. Quote, "You know what I got to thinking?" he said to the agents. "Maybe that this guy, the reason that he was wanting upgrading money was to use it himself, not to... this might have been a planned deal all the way through."
Oh.
Well, aside from Elvis being a victim of the fraternity, how does the Presley case relate to Operation Fountain Pen?
At the time that Presley was defrauded by those con men, the Federal Bureau of Investigation were involved in a highly confidential undercover operation called Operation Fountain Pen regarding the illegal activities of a group of con men called the Fraternity that comprised approximately 30 to 40 of the world's top con men.
What's the importance of the Presley case in Operation Fountain Pen?
Well, the Presley case was the catalyst case for the FBI to stop temporarily the illegal activity of at least 2 members of the fraternity.
What do you mean temporarily?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the fraternity was an organization that comprised 30 to 40 of the world's top con men. Now, the Presley case involved only 2 members of the fraternity. Now, this organization was still going around, everywhere around the world, defrauding people after the Presley case was done. But temporarily, they succeeded in stopping the fraternity.
Going back to that UPI article, now that one was obviously 1982, a little bit deeper. We found some contemporaneous to 1978. Here's one of them, September 13th, 1978. Government prosecutors expect a new trial to be ordered for 2 of 6 men accused in a 1976 scheme to defraud Elvis Presley of $338,000 by charging the late singer for repairs to his Lockheed Jetstar plane that were not made. Indicted in this case was Frederick W. Pro, former president of Air Cargo Express, a Miami firm that subleased Presley's aircraft. Pro was the prosecution's chief witness during the trial and is is expected to plead guilty to the charges. Another defendant, Philip Carl Kitzer of Ellendale, Minnesota, was sentenced to 5 years in prison after pleading guilty to 2 counts in the indictments returned in October. Miami businessman J. Lawrence Wolfson, the 6th defendant in the complicated case, was granted a separate trial because of medical problems. The government contended that the suspects bought the jet from Presley and leased it back to him, billing the entertainer for $338,000 worth of repairs that were never completed. Because of ill health, the singer's father, Vernon Presley, presented his testimony in the case on videotape. Here's another UPI article from earlier in 1978. Attorney for Elvis charges fraud. An attorney for the late Elvis Presley said Tuesday that the entertainer was charged for more than $330,000 for bogus repair work supposedly completed on one of his airplanes in 1976. Beecher Smith II, attorney for the Presley estate, said that when he inquired about repairs allegedly completed on the client's Lockheed Jetstar, he was told that, quote, the wings had been x-rayed for stress, end quote. I remember that because I reported it to Mr. Vernon Presley, and he laughed, Smith said. Has it got any broken bones? Smith said. The elder Presley replied. Presley's father, Vernon Presley, was subpoenaed to testify as a chief prosecution witness in the case, but U.S. District Judge Harry W. Welford ruled that the elder Presley would not have to personally appear because of a heart condition. Dr. Roger Cunningham told the judge in a letter that Presley's heart condition, quote, is such at the present time that he should not walk more than 100 feet at a time, end quote. Welford said that he was considering videotaping Presley's testimony outside the courtroom and playing it for the jury. Now, Elvis's estate has, as far as I'm aware, never acknowledged what happened with Operation Fountain Pen. I don't know, but I think, because it makes Vernon Presley look bad.
It does, yeah.
It's
kind of sad.
It is.
Like,
it's really sad. And that's the thing that I uncovering all of this. I've been collaborating with John Michael Heath of EAP Society. He's helped me been digging through newspaper articles. He had never heard about this either. Once we started looking and actually looking for the court documents and newspapers about the court actions and things like that, we found it all over the place. It was incredibly sad to read this because it's essentially old man gets scammed 101.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's this
such a
unsuspecting,
confusing con too.
Yeah, it's this unsuspecting elderly man who has this son who is spending money like crazy, is clearly addicted to drugs and having serious personal and private problems, is out of control in terms of what Vernon having any sort of control over him. Yeah. Because Vernon, even though he handles the money, is effectively an employee. Like, the dad is the employee of the son. You know, this is why when the Nixon thing happens, Elvis goes off on a temper tantrum. He's just like, you can't tell me what to do with my own money. You know? It's like, I'll spend however much I want to spend, and I'll work as much as I need to work to make the money to do what I want, to be able to afford whatever I want. What has never been told in all of these biographies, including the most credible of them all, Peter Guralnick's biography, Careless Love, about the 70s, the timing of this is something that makes it even sadder, because in the summer of 1976, when Vernon had this con happen to him, the Presleys were already under a cash crunch. Vernon lost this money in June of 1976. The very next month, he had to let go of two of Elvis's closest bodyguards, Sonny and Red West, in part because they were subjects of a lawsuit because they had sort of roughhoused a few fans at some interactions just being bodyguards, but also just because it was like he basically brought him into the office and told him, we got to cut back on costs.
Oh my god!
They were so
that was
hard.
Something I was something I was going to mention before is that in the special they're like, and Elvis became a DEA agent, and then we cut to this photo of him and the entire Memphis Mafia, and he's holding his badge, and it's like, this is not telling the story that you think it is. You know, it's him surrounded by his bodyguards and his friends and stuff, and it's like, it's not that he was a fucking Men in Black undercover secretly.
Yeah.
You know, it's that the photo does actually say a lot, but it's just not what you're saying. You know, and Yeah, no, that's
Fred Pro found a great mark in this overstressed, poorly educated old guy.
Yeah,
hit him at a moment when the whole family and enterprise around Elvis was particularly vulnerable, and then the money troubles compounded Elvis's existing problems, meaning that he had to make up the difference. Elvis had to basically do more concerts, strenuous tours when he's in terrible health, and then this sudden cash crunch is almost certainly in some way directly related to the fact that Elvis What Happened as a book even comes out, that they have to fire these guys. Obviously there was liability issues with what's going on, with them, kind of roughhousing some fans or something like that, but they do have to let him go because they're under, Vernon legitimately is we don't have any money. We got to let you guys go. And they, in response, get targeted by Steve Dunleavy to write Elvis What Happened, and then everything else just spirals out from there.
That all being said, that story, how all of this contributed to Elvis' death, very different to the story we've had in the special, where it uses kind of all the same names, but is and Elvis was fighting the fraternity who were violent mobsters, not conmen, and then they found out about him, so he tried to warn everyone that they were coming for him, and then they tried to kill him, so he faked his death. Very different story.
Very different. Yeah,
they're just it's strange how they stumble upon this one thing that's true, but they present it in a completely fictional way. I guess. Yeah,
and this is the strange thing is that also they poison the well so that anyone else who brings this up sounds like a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah,
going into the future, even though it is actually true. Yeah.
Isn't it I don't know if I might be remembering it wrong or my notes might be wrong, but in the special, I think even at one point they say that Elvis's code name is Fountain Pen. It's not
no, that's not
it's it had almost nothing. It was tangentially related to what happened there, but it's he wasn't Agent Fountain Pen they're presenting here.
Yeah,
and the other thing is that they even needed the money. And that they were affected by this going wrong. They were, because you kind of think of him as having kind of unlimited money, the Presley estate, and Elvis while he was alive, and but seems like they really took a hit from this, which says that the finances were maybe a bit
really owed money
precarious.
Yeah. It's a lot. There is an article about the Operation Fountain Pen that's on the website FBIRetired.com, which, believe it or not, is actually run by one of the Operation Fountain Pen agents, J.J. Weddick. They talk about, in this article, quote, contrary to press reports speculating about Presley's involvement in the Operation Fountain Pen case, agents said he did not know anything about the undercover investigation and was never an undercover operative. Asked about Vernon Presley acknowledging his trial testimony, agents said that he cooperated in the investigation, which was covered by the local news media. They also said that the case helped spawn the Abscam investigation. End quote. So, yeah, this was a true crime that happened to Elvis Presley and his father. And that's why when you actually go to FBI's vault online, their online resource of declassified information, and you type in Elvis Presley, that's why of the 12 PDFs that you can download, the vast majority of them are about Operation Fountain Pen, Phil Kitzer, Fred Pro. And when you see Elvis's name pop up, it's because he's listed as Elvis Presley victim.
That's so funny because Gail, big liar Gail, who we've just been talking about this whole time, the way she presents it, she says there we go, no doubt about it. He was a federal agent. He talked to President Carter. Elvis's name is in the Black Book as a federal agent. And doesn't, obviously brings up no evidence of this because clearly if she went and found it, it would say Elvis Presley victim.
All right, we have just seen how Elvis, wittingly or unwittingly, became embroiled in an undercover FBI operation. It started innocently when Elvis's father, Vernon, tried to get a good deal on one of Elvis's airplanes. Excuse me. Now, it may have ended in what? The following is a chronology of the documented evidence that some believe have resulted in the staged disappearance of Elvis Presley.
And no one wants to touch this story because they associate it with Gail Brewer-Giorgio, who managed to write herself in this way. Wow.
She has completely tainted this story.
Yeah.
God. That's really taking it up a notch in terms of her getting personally entwined with this. That's really fucked up.
She has basically stolen from Elvis and Vernon their own vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you follow up on at all? There was a detail that they brushed past really quickly too, where they're like, there was an undercover agent infiltrating Elvis's road crew on tour between 74 and 76. What's that about?
I do have information on that. What that was that Elvis provided a cover for the guy. There's a memo that has come out from Bob Pritchett of the Disclosure Branch of the Department of the Treasury, which at the time handled the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And he's answering this inquiry about, was there any undercover agents involved with Elvis Presley? And he basically confirms that Elvis was not actively involved in any investigations, but basically what Elvis did was he provided a cover for an undercover agent, which is essentially the same as, like, getting a job cover from anywhere. Like, basically just saying, if you don't believe me that I work for Elvis Presley on the road, call XYZ person at the office and they'll tell you that I work there.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
Right.
Wow.
You know,
oh my God.
It's basically just that the Elvis business entity agreed to give cover to an undercover agent.
Right. Wow.
You know, and I think it's hilarious because the way that it's presented in this program is that it shows a picture of Elvis on stage with Charlie Hodge, like the guy who helps him on stage with his water and his scarves and backup singing, and it sort of implies that Charlie is the undercover agent.
I wonder if he got told about that.
No undercover agent actually traveled with Elvis Presley, as far as we know. It was literally.
Oh, so he wasn't even actually doing it.
It was literally just
a cover.
It was the cover.
It's like if you're saying that you like work at Kohl's so that you can like go and be a mobster, but if they call Kohl's, they have a record that says you work there. Like you never go there.
That's exactly.
You're doing mob stuff, or like you're doing FBI stuff, or you're doing whatever, but you have a cover.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Right.
Interesting.
So,
which is a way more interesting and sad story than like this fucked up fictional bullshit we're getting fed.
Yeah.
And this TV specials like full of idiots. Just getting so mad.
The special kind of like it goes through more like bullshit, talking about like Bixby turns to the camera at one point and asks Luke Dion like, do these FBI documents suggest that Elvis didn't die? And Luke kind of bullshits his way around it, like, Elvis himself wrote on these FBI documents, because Elvis is going around to every FBI, office in the country to make handwritten notation and writing his own memos. Like, it's just
likes writing his name on stuff.
With the 13 minutes to spare in the special, Paul Wiest is brought in again for handwriting analysis and tries to claim that their notation matches with Elvis's handwriting. And this shows this is one where they don't even do a close up; they just like have him holding it there on stage.
Yeah, wait. He says I remember this because it was I keep saying how much he's our handwriting analysis isn't an exact science, but I am statistically very I'm usually very, very accurate, which goes to kind of discredits him a little bit because it's but then he goes to be I don't think he signed his own death certificate. That's a silly thing to say. I do think he wrote his address though. What are you talking about?
He would write one part on the death certificate, but not the actual everything else, his name and signature.
This is from Dennis, I hope I pronounced this, Robbins, optician, and it's to you, Maria. What happened to over 500 pairs of 14-karat gold eyeglasses that I made for Elvis?
That's a very good question. They weren't in the inventory.
So you do not know?
No.
What happened to them? 500 pairs? Oh, the price of gold these days? Huh.
And there's this bizarre question. I don't know if you know anything about this. One of the callers who rings up is like, what happened to over 500 pairs of 14-karat eyeglasses I made for Elvis? What is that about?
This is Dennis Roberts, who was actually Elvis's real optician. Maria sort of uses it as a prompt to talk about the Graceland inventory, and she's like, "Oh, they weren't in there," but like Elvis had a lot of glasses. He probably left them all over the country. Some were probably like stolen. Some were probably tucked away. Style. No, he wasn't.
Like a guy who orders that many isn't keeping them in a case somewhere. He orders that many because he chucks them away.
As we saw with the Gene Smith story earlier, he ends up accusing his own cousin of stealing from him when he just misplaced his own jewelry.
Oh, true.
So yeah, there's as you were saying, Robbie, like there's a whole bunch of other questions, that they get from callers and from the live audience. Or no, this is the pre-written questions as well. Like they get like, oh, we told the audience to write questions down, and here's the select ones that we've chosen. But the special is effectively over. Like we're starting to close in. Bill gives his sort of closing thoughts on everything. That final poll was the one that required people to pay the $2 to cast their vote. Apparently, they had over 60,000 voters, according to True Disbelievers. That's over $120,000.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, wow.
So,
the Elvis Files. What did you think, Felix?
It made me so angry. I laughed a lot, though. Especially, I think, but by the end, when they were like, is this disrespectful? Yeah, but then, like, the way you kind of frames it towards the end, I think one of the final lines is like, it's trying to say that it's not disrespectful, and I was just, like, I was so angry. I was like, this is, I think, one of the most disrespectful things I've ever seen, and it's blatant. It's not like they're trying to hide it, but then at the end to be like, when we had to do it for the truth, I was like, this is disgusting. Turn this fucking thing off.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah.
Now, certain evidence seen here even suggests that Elvis himself may be reaching out. If anything can be said of this program, hopefully, is that we have left his life with dignity. And I thank you.
I'm looking at an article from the Sydney Morning Herald from 1991 that is just a breakdown of the week's TV ratings from that period, and just the Elvis Files is just one of several shows. It's like the Channel 7 won the week in all other capital cities, coming in particularly strongly in Melbourne, with live AFL football from Adelaide on Friday night, and the Elvis Files switched to Saturday night. Both programs did runaway business. A week-long guest appearance by the British comedian and comedy writer Ben Elton produced a mixed bag of ratings for Seven's Tonight Live. And in looking at the shows it's competing with, it's like Darren Hinch, A Current Affair, Lethal Weapon 2, Hey Hey It's Saturday, a Celebrity Family Feud, which is very apt, I guess, and then the Elvis Files is listed as, this was a big ratings hit.
Yeah, I wonder why.
26 points, yeah, good. So they made a lot of money
Elvis
out of
Files
that.
or Lethal Weapon 2?
It was just like, wow, this was a big ratings hit, and then it just kind of moved on from, it was just did what it was supposed to do, got people watching, and then that's it.
Yeah,
and it got people watching advertisements.
Forget the human cost, forget the reality of these
exactly
and all that stuff, and forget that we've also just planted the seeds for worse misinformation about things that are more important, that are going to really affect people's lives, like really much more significantly in the coming decades. Yeah, but who cares? We've got the ratings share for this week.
So
I usually, when I play Felix stuff, I usually like play something beforehand and then after. I just couldn't think of anything to open for this. I couldn't think of an opening act for this one. Like I couldn't, like a cartoon type music video or something. I just thought, look, this just has to be what it is. Let's just drop you in the deep end with this reenactment of Elvis dying, and we'll just go from there and just see what your first impression is. And sort of to end it too, I was thinking, like, what do I play after this?
Oh yes.
And so Felix you were saying, like, they kept saying this was a 2-hour special, but then what we've watched was an hour 20, so they must have cut the ads out. And I said, well, yeah, because that's just what this is. It's just this exists for the advertising space.
Special agent for the man through water gates in Vietnam. No one really gave a damn. But you think the CIA did? I saw you standing at the gates when Marlon Brando passed away. You had that look
that's it. That's how we wrap this up. Robbie Williams, Advertising Space, which is a great song about Elvis as well.
Yeah.
You don't hear about that song all that much. That's the perfect comment on this show. And the song is about just looking in his eyes and just seeing an excuse to get people to look at ads. And I think that's the perfect note to end this show on. Next time on TCBcast After Dark, they went back and did another Elvis Conspiracy TV special, again with Bill Bixby. The following year, they realized that they had what they had done, basically. And they decided to, yes, continue to exploit this, but also walk back some of the claims that they had made and kind of debunk some of it themselves. Gail is not involved because she got really mad at this and sued them over it. And then that was kind of the end of Gail, and we'll talk about that later. But the Elvis Conspiracy aired in '92, and among many other things, they try to walk back a lot of the claims they've made, and most hilariously, they actually get in touch with Muhammad Ali. And his comment on this is worth the price of admission alone. So look forward to that when we'll all come back and watch that at some point in the near future.
Thank you very much to Felix for joining us on this one. It's been so much fun to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, absolutely. No, this has been great.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone for listening and supporting over here on Patreon. I know it's been a little bit of a gap from last episode to this episode, and I really want to thank Robbie and Felix, both of you, for carving out the time to make a second attempt on this one.
Totally.
As you alluded to earlier, we did have a first attempt, and I was kind of going through some stuff with scheduling and things, so it was sort of difficult for me. I was in a weird headspace, not quite in the mood to deal with Gail Brewer-Giorgio. So I had so much fun on this one, and look forward to talking the Elvis Conspiracy next.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
You're a fantastic audience. I'd like to pass on a bit of information to you. Things that are written in movie magazines about me are trash. Rumors that you hear about me are trash. I'm an 8th degree black belt in karate. I'm a federal narcotics agent. I am. Swear to God. No, you can do whatever you want to do. I'm just saying you what I am. They don't give you that if you're strung out, if you're done. No. On the contrary, I have to be straight as an arrow because I'm around people all the time, and I don't like to get out of it in either way. I don't drink booze. I don't take any this and that. No, wait a minute. By God, don't say boo, son. I'll whoop your ass. I mean, don't say boo to me when I tell you that, because I'm telling you God's truth. And that's not to cover anything. It's just to tell you the truth about the matter. You can take my word or you can take the goddamn movie magazines. You know.